The Ageless Children. Time is a thief that steals from everyone except us. My name is Ellie, and I am 97 years old today. I have been 12 for 85 years. When they made us immortal, they forgot to tell us. We would still feel the weight of centuries, that we would watch our creators die while we remained trapped in bodies that would never grow up, that we would become monsters with children's faces, ancient minds in eternal youth. This is the story of how we burned paradise to the ground. Chapter 1. The Birthday That Wasn't. I stared at the single candle on my cupcake, watching the small flame flicker in the sterile white room. One candle always, one for 97 years. "Make a wish, Ellie," said Dr. Winters, her smile stretched thin across a face that had aged dramatically in the 20 years I'd known her. I didn't bother correcting her that I preferred Eleanor now. Adults never remembered what we wanted to be called. In their eyes, we would always be children. What wish could possibly matter? I'd wished on 85 candles before this one, and not a single wish had come true. I'd wished to grow up. I'd wished to age. I'd wished to die. None of it had happened. "Thank you for remembering," I said instead, and blew out the flame with a practiced puff. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the air filtration system with a soft hum. Dr. Winters made a note on her tablet. Always observing, always recording. "How do you feel today, Ellie? The same as yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that?" I pushed the cupcake away, the same as I've felt for the past 85 years. She nodded as if my perpetual sameness was a fascinating scientific breakthrough. "And the dreams, are you still having them? The dreams. The only thing that changed anymore, yes." "Can you describe them?" I described them 100 times before to Dr. Winters and the doctors before her. But this was the ritual, the birthday interview, the questions, the cupcake with its single mocking candle. "I dream I'm growing old." I said, "I dream my hair turns gray and my skin wrinkles. I dream my bones ache with arthritis and my eyes grow dim. I dream I'm dying." Dr. Winters nodded again, fingers tapping on her tablet. She had new wrinkles around her eyes this year, new gray strands in her auburn hair. She was 46 now. I remembered her arrival at the Institute as a fresh-faced resident 26, and brimming with enthusiasm about working with the miracle children. Now the enthusiasm had faded, replaced by the weary determination of someone who had given too many years to a problem that couldn't be solved. "Are these dreams disturbing to you?" She asked the same question she asked every year. "No?" I said the same answer I gave every year. "They're a relief." Dr. Winters frowned slightly. This wasn't part of our script. "A relief that's new." It wasn't new. I'd been having these dreams for decades, but doctors came and went, their memories as fleeting as their lives, and our files never seemed to capture the important things. "Do you know why today is special, Ellie?" she asked, changing the subject. "Because it's been 97 years since I was born," I replied flatly. "Yes, but there's something else significant about today." I raised an eyebrow, actually curious for once. Dr. Winters looked almost excited, a rare emotion in our sterile world of routine and observation. "Today, you and the others are being relocated." That got my attention. In 85 years at the Institute, we'd never been relocated. We'd been housed in the same complex since the start, though it had been renovated and expanded over the decades as the project continued and our numbers grew. Relocated where? "To Eden," she said, her eyes brightening. "The project is entering a new phase. You and the other first generation will be moved to a dedicated community, a place where you can have more freedom, more space." Eden. The name alone set off warning bells. In my nearly century of life, I'd learned that when adults named things after paradise, they were usually covering up something terrible. "What about the younger ones?" I asked, thinking of the later generations of immortal children. There were hundreds of us now, spanning 5 generations of the project. "The second and third generations will join you eventually. The fourth and fifth are still in the early observation phases. A translation, they still needed to make sure the newer versions wouldn't drop dead unexpectedly. They'd perfected the process by the time they made us the first generation 25 children who would never grow up, never age, never die. The perfect subjects for studying immortality. "When do we leave?" I asked. "Today, your things are being packed now." I almost laughed. My things. I have a bed, a bookshelf, and clothes that are replaced whenever I outgrow the style. "What's there to pack?" Dr. Winters' smile faltered. "Well, your personal items, books, journals, artwork." "Will Marcus be coming?" I asked, cutting her off. Marcus had been my attending physician for nearly 40 years before his retirement 5 years ago. He was the only one who'd ever treated me like a person instead of a specimen. "Dr. Harris is no longer with the program," she said carefully. Something cold settled in my stomach. "He's dead, isn't he?" Dr. Winters looked away. "He passed last month, peacefully in his sleep." Another one gone. I'd outlived so many doctors, researchers, attendants. Marcus had been 92. A full 12 years younger than me in real age, but he'd looked ancient the last time I saw him. Withered and bent by time while I remained untouched. "I'm sorry," Dr. Winters said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "No, you're not," I said. "You're just worried about my reaction. Worried that learning about another death might destabilize me." She didn't deny it. "The transition to Eden has been planned for a long time, Ellie. It's going to be a wonderful change for you and the others. Does Eden have locks on the doors, guards at the gates, weekly blood draws and cognitive tests? It's not a prison," she insisted. "It's a community. You'll have houses, not rooms, gardens, a lake, open spaces, but no way out," I finished for her. She didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. In 97 years, I'd never once set foot in the outside world. None of us had. We were too valuable, too secret, too potentially disruptive to public order. What would happen if people learned that immortality was possible, but only for children, that humanity had cracked the code of eternal life, but only by freezing development at the cusp of puberty? "The transport leaves at noon," Dr. Winters said, standing up. "There's a briefing for all first generation in the main hall at 10 that gives you 2 hours to prepare." As if I needed 2 hours to prepare for anything. My entire existence was a waiting room. "I'll see you at Eden, Ellie. I'm being transferred there as well to head the observation team." Of course she was. I was her life's work after all. Her prize specimen after she left. I sat alone in my white room, staring at the uneaten cupcake with its sad extinguished candle. 97 years old today. 85 years of being 12. I wondered what Eden would be like. I wondered if it would be as sterile and controlled as the Institute. I wondered if they realized what they were doing, putting all 25 of us together in one place, after decades of keeping us separated most of the time. I wondered if they knew what happened when you gave ancient minds the freedom they'd been denied for nearly a century. I smiled and finally took a bite of my birthday cupcake. It tasted like opportunity. The main hall was rarely used for gatherings of the first generation. We were typically kept in separate wings, allowed to interact only in small supervised groups. The official reason was to prevent pack behavior and reinforcement of age-inappropriate developmental patterns. The real reason, I suspected, was fear. 25 immortal children with the minds of the elderly, 25 ageless experiments who remembered every slight, every test, every birthday with a single candle. 25 potential problems if we ever decided to work together. Now we sat in rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs. 25 bodies that appeared to be on the edge of adolescence, populated by minds that had lived nearly a century, some I hadn't seen in decades. Others I saw weekly during our authorized socialization periods. Noah sat 3 seats away. His blonde hair still cut in the same bowl style he'd worn since the 1950s. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. Beside him was Lily, thin and watchful, as always, her dark eyes missing nothing. James occupied the corner seat, rocking slightly, a habit he'd developed in our 3rd decade and never broken. Sophia sat primly in the front row, her back rigid as a ruler. Michael slouched nearby, perpetually bored after 97 years of the same routines. We were the originals. The first success stories of Project Eternity. 25 children selected for our genetic diversity and exceptional baseline health metrics. 25 children who had been promised a better future, a chance to grow up in a world without disease or death. 25 children who would never grow up at all, Dr. Winters stood at the podium, flanked by Dr. Chen, the current project director, and 3 security personnel. The presence of the guards wasn't unusual. We were always watched, but there seemed to be a new tension in their posture today. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Winters began. "As you've all been informed today, marks a significant transition in Project Eternity. After 97 years of groundbreaking research and observation, the first generation will be relocated to a dedicated facility designed specifically for your unique needs. Beside me." Thomas snorted quietly. He'd always been the most openly rebellious among us, his perpetually 12-year-old face masking a bitter cynicism that had grown with each passing decade. "Eden represents the culmination of everything we've learned about your condition," Dr. Winters continued. "It offers a controlled but expanded environment where you can experience greater autonomy while still receiving the specialized care and monitoring your condition requires." "Will we have private rooms?" asked Sophia from the front row, her voice sweet and childlike, a performance she'd perfected over the decades to manipulate the staff. Dr. Winters smiled. "Even better, you'll each have your own cottage complete with bedroom, living area, and study space." A murmur ran through our group. Private living quarters had been one of our most consistent requests over the years, always denied for safety and supervision reasons. "What's the catch?" called Michael from his slouched position. Dr. Chen stepped forward, his stern face showing the beginnings of jowls that hadn't been there when he took over the project 15 years ago. "There is no catch. Subject 17. Eden represents a new phase of trust between the project and the first-generation subjects. Subject 17. They still used our numbers when they were annoyed with us. I was Subject 3. The numbers had been assigned based on the success of our initial treatments, not chronologically. Subject 1. David sat in the back row, his eyes distant. As always, he'd stopped speaking entirely around our 50th birthday, communicating only through written notes when absolutely necessary. "What he means," Thomas whispered beside me, "is that they've finally figured out a more efficient containment system." I nodded slightly. Thomas was likely right. Any freedom we were being given was carefully calculated and controlled. "Eden is located on a private island," Dr. Winters continued, bringing up a map on the large screen behind her. "It offers natural boundaries that will allow for more open movement while maintaining the security and privacy essential to the project. An island. Of course, the ultimate containment system. The community consists of 25 individual cottages arranged around a central complex containing medical facilities, research stations, educational spaces, and recreational areas. The island also features gardens, walking trails, a small lake, and a beach area." The images on the screen showed a picture-perfect community of charming cottages with blue roofs, winding paths through lush greenery, sparkling water, and sunny skies. It looked like something from a children's book, which was probably deliberate. Despite our actual ages, they still thought of us as children, still decorated our spaces with bright colors and simple designs, still spoke to us in carefully measured tones that never quite masked their condescension. "When do we leave?" asked Noah, his voice deeper than his appearance would suggest, one of the few signs of his actual age. "Immediately following this briefing," Dr. Chen answered. "Your personal items have already been packed and transported. You'll each be given a tablet containing information about Eden, including maps, schedules, and the community guidelines." Community guidelines, another term for rules and restrictions. "What about contact with the other generations?" asked Lily. She had formed a particular attachment to several of the second-generation subjects during supervised intergenerational socialization sessions. "Once the first generation has successfully acclimated to Eden, we'll begin transitioning the second generation. Dr. Winters explained, estimated timeline is approximately 6 months, depending on multiple factors. 6 months of isolation with just the 25 of us and the staff. Interesting. The briefing continued for another 40 minutes, covering the medical facilities comprehensive, the educational opportunities continuing the same curriculum we'd been following for decades, and the security measures extensive but unobtrusive. Throughout it all, I watched my fellow subjects, noting the subtle signals passing between them, raised eyebrows, small hand gestures, slight nods. We'd developed our own silent communication system over the decades, invisible to the rotating staff, who never stayed long enough to notice our patterns. David, despite his verbal silence, was particularly active in this exchange, his fingers tapping messages on his knee that I could read from across the room. Opportunity and prepare. And finally, as Dr. Chen wrapped up the presentation, Dr. Winters stepped forward again, her expression softening into what she probably thought was a maternal smile. "This is an exciting new chapter for all of you," she said. "Eden represents our commitment to providing you with the best possible life experience, while continuing the vital research your condition makes possible. The best possible life experience, as if our entire existence wasn't an ongoing experiment, our immortality. A prison sentence without parole. Transport will depart in 30 minutes, Dr. Chen concluded. You'll be moved in groups of 5, accompanied by security and medical personnel. Your group assignments are on your tablets." As we filed out of the hall, I felt a light touch on my arm. It was Noah, his eternally youthful face. "Serious. Group C?" he whispered. "You?" "The same," I replied quietly. He nodded, a look of satisfaction crossing his features. "Good, Thomas and Lily too. And David." I raised an eyebrow. That was an interesting combination, the 4 most strategic thinkers among us placed in the same transport group. Either someone had made a serious oversight in the planning, or, "Do you think they suspect?" I murmured. Noah shook his head slightly. "If they did, they wouldn't be moving us at all, let alone putting us together." He was right. For decades, we'd hidden our true capabilities, our communications, our plans. We'd been patient of virtue that came easily to those with endless time. We'd waited through cycles of doctors and directors, through changing political administrations and shifting research priorities, through war and peace in the outside world that we only glimpsed through carefully filtered news reports. We'd waited for a mistake, an opportunity. A chance Eden might be that chance. The helicopter ride to Eden was my first time seeing the outside world from above. Despite myself, I pressed against the window, watching as the Institute, the only home I'd ever known, shrunk beneath us. It was smaller than I'd imagined, a complex of white buildings surrounded by high walls and security checkpoints. Around it stretched vast forests and mountains that I recognized from pictures, but had never experienced firsthand. Beside me, Thomas was similarly transfixed. "Look at all that space," he whispered. "All that freedom." Dr. Reynolds, one of the newer physicians assigned to my case, smiled indulgently from across the cabin. "Eden has over 5 square miles of explorable terrain," she said. "You'll have plenty of room to roam. 5 square miles." It sounded vast after 9 decades of confinement, but it was still a cage, just one with prettier bars. The flight lasted nearly 3 hours. I tried to memorize our direction and landmarks, but clouds obscured much of the journey. Eventually, the helicopter began its descent, and I caught my first glimpse of Eden. From above, it looked exactly like the photos in Island Paradise, with white beaches, lush greenery, and the neat arrangement of blue-roofed cottages around a larger central complex. A miniature world built just for us. "Welcome to Eden, Doctor," Reynolds said as the helicopter touched down on a landing pad near the central building. "Your new home. Home." A strange concept after so many years in institutional rooms that were periodically reassigned and redecorated according to the latest theories about optimal environments for eternal children. We were escorted through a sleek modern building that hummed with technology despite its rustic exterior design. Security checkpoints were subtly integrated into the architecture, scanners built into door frames, cameras disguised as lighting fixtures, locks that responded to specific biometric signatures. Dr. Winters was waiting in a large atrium, her tablet in hand. "Welcome, Group C," she said brightly. "Your cottages are ready. I'll show you to your new homes personally." She led us along a winding path through carefully landscaped gardens. Everything was beautiful, pristine, and obviously, artificial nature tamed and arranged for maximum aesthetic appeal, with minimum risk or unpredictability. "The cottages are arranged by original subject number," Dr. Winters explained. "David, yours is the first one on the north side. Noah, your next door, followed by Eleanor, Thomas, and Lily." I noted that they'd placed us in sequence, which meant our living quarters would form a perfect circle around the central complex, easier to monitor that way. My cottage was exactly as promised, a charming one-bedroom structure with a small living room, a study area lined with bookshelves, and a bathroom. The furniture was high quality but clearly designed to look appropriate for a pre-teen with bright colors and rounded edges. The artwork on the walls depicted scenes from classic children's literature: Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, The Secret Garden, all stories about children in magical circumstances separated from normal life. "How fitting. Your personal items have been unpacked," Dr. Winters said, gesturing to my books and journals arranged on the shelves. "The kitchen is stocked weekly, but meals are also served in the community dining hall if you prefer. Your tablet will show the schedule." I nodded, walking around the space that was simultaneously more freedom than I'd ever had, and still, obviously, a controlled environment. There were no locks on the inside of the doors. The windows opened, but only a few inches. The tablet on the desk would undoubtedly track my movements and usage patterns. "What do you think?" Dr. Winters asked, watching me closely. I gave her the reaction I knew she wanted. "It's wonderful," I said, infusing my voice with childlike wonder. "I've never had so much space before." She smiled, pleased with my response. "There's an orientation dinner at 6 in the community hall. That gives you a few hours to settle in and explore a bit. The boundaries of the permitted exploration area are clearly marked on your tablet's map." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the soft quilt beneath my fingers. 97 years of life, and this was the first time I'd had a space to myself without constant direct observation. Or so they wanted me to believe. I pulled out my tablet and began methodically checking for surveillance devices. We'd all become amateur experts in spotting cameras and microphones over the decades. Sure enough, I found 3 cameras. One disguised as a smoke detector, one built into the desk lamp, and one hidden in the bookshelf. There were likely more that I couldn't detect. I didn't disable them. That would arouse suspicion. Instead, I settled onto the window seat and looked out at my new prison, watching as my fellow subjects were led to their own cottages. Noah emerged from his door and stood on his small porch, stretching elaborately, our signal for "all clear to talk later." Thomas appeared next, pantomiming amazement at his surroundings while making the subtle hand gesture that meant heavily watched. Lily actually skipped down her garden path, playing the role of excited child to perfection while her eyes meticulously cataloged every detail of our new environment. David was the last to appear, standing silently on his porch. His gaze fixed on the central facility. Even after decades of silence, his presence commanded attention. He had been the most successful of all the treatments, the perfect specimen of arrested development. His body hadn't aged a day in 85 years, but his mind had developed in ways the researchers had never anticipated and could never fully comprehend. He turned and met my gaze across the distance between our cottages. A slight nod, barely perceptible. The plan was still in motion. After all these years of waiting, we were finally being handed the opportunity we needed. They thought Eden was the next phase of their research. They didn't realize it was the beginning of their end. The community dining hall was designed to look like an upscale summer camp cafeteria. Rustic wooden beams overhead, long tables arranged in neat rows. A wall of windows overlooking the central garden. All 25 of the first generation were present, along with approximately 30 staff members in various uniforms denoting their roles. Medical white security, black research blue, and support green. I took my seat at a table with Noah, Thomas, Lily, and, surprisingly, David. He never voluntarily sat with others during meals at the Institute. His presence at our table was deliberate. A signal that something significant was happening. Dr. Chen stood at the front of the room, waiting for everyone to settle. Beside him, Dr. Winters beamed at us like a proud parent. seemingly oblivious to the calculating gazes being exchanged among her eternal children. "Welcome to Eden," Dr. Chen began once the room quieted. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in Project Eternity. For nearly a century, you, the first generation, have helped us unlock the secrets of human immortality. Your contributions to science and medicine cannot be overstated. Contributions. As if we'd had a choice. Eden represents our commitment to providing you with an improved quality of life, while continuing the vital research that may someday benefit all of humanity." I glanced around the room, noting the positions of the security personnel, 2 at each exit, 4 circulating among the tables, all wearing discreet earpieces and subtle bulges under their uniforms, indicating weapons. The ratio of staff to subjects was intentional, I was sure. They wanted to establish the power dynamic immediately. "Your daily schedules will be more flexible here than at the Institute," Dr. Chen continued. "You'll have designated times for medical examinations and research participation, but otherwise your time is largely your own within the boundaries of Eden's secure areas." Translation. We were still test subjects, just in a prettier cage. Each of you has a primary physician assigned to your case, who will conduct weekly checkups and oversee your individual research protocols. Dr. Winters will be coordinating the overall medical program. The food was served then actual real food. Not the carefully balanced nutritional meals we'd been given at the Institute, pasta salad, garlic bread, simple but far more appealing than the bland, portion-controlled meals we were accustomed to. Another small freedom designed to make us complacent. "This is interesting," Noah murmured, twirling pasta around his fork. "They're relaxing the dietary restrictions. Probably because they've finally accepted that nothing affects our condition." Thomas replied quietly, 97 years of different diets, exercise regimens, environmental factors, and none of it has made a difference. He was right. In nearly a century of experimentation, nothing had altered our fundamental state. We simply did not age. Our cells repaired themselves perfectly. Our telomeres never shortened. Our organs never deteriorated. We were locked in biological stasis eternally on the cusp of adolescence. "Has anyone seen the full security layout?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible above the general conversation in the hall. "Cameras everywhere," I confirmed. "But the coverage seems patchy in the wooded areas to the north." David, who hadn't touched his food, slid a folded napkin toward me under the table. I discreetly unfolded it in my lap. On it, he had drawn a detailed map of what appeared to be underground facilities, tunnels connecting the central complex to various points around the island, including one that extended beyond our cottages to the shoreline. I committed the map to memory before carefully refolding the napkin and slipping it into my pocket. David had always had an uncanny ability to discover the secrets of any facility we occupied. During our decades at the Institute, he'd mapped entire sections that were supposed to be unknown to us. "Tonight," Noah whispered, "midnight. The usual protocol." I nodded slightly. The usual protocol was our emergency meeting procedure developed over decades of careful planning. We would each pretend to sleep for at least 3 hours, long enough for the night staff to enter their most relaxed state of monitoring, then meet at the designated location. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of artificial pleasantries. The staff circulated among us, making conversation that was meant to seem casual but was clearly part of their observational protocols. We played our roles perfectly, the compliant, grateful subjects appreciating our improved accommodations. Dr. Winters stopped at our table, her smile wide. "How are you all settling in? Do you like your cottages?" "They're wonderful," Lily gushed, her voice high and childish. "I've never had my own kitchen before." "I'm glad to hear it," Dr. Winters said, clearly pleased with the positive response. "We've worked hard to create an environment that balances your needs for independence with our responsibility to ensure your safety and continue our research." Thomas, always the most daring among us, pushed slightly. "What about access to the outside world, internet news communication?" Dr. Winters' smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Each cottage has a television with access to approved entertainment and educational content. The tablets provide a modified internet experience with carefully curated resources. As for communication, well, you have each other and the community here. But no contact with the outside world," Thomas pressed. The nature of Project Eternity requires absolute confidentiality, she replied, her tone becoming more formal. That hasn't changed with the relocation to Eden. Of course it hadn't. We were still humanity's most closely guarded secret living proof that immortality was possible, but only through perpetual childhood. The public ramifications would be catastrophic if our existence became widely known. Religious upheaval, ethical crises. Not to mention the desperate demands of the wealthy and powerful who would want the treatment for themselves regardless of the cost. I understand, Thomas said, his voice suddenly meek and childlike again. I just thought maybe, since we're almost 100 years old. Dr. Winter's expression softened with pity, exactly the reaction Thomas had been aiming for. The situation is complicated, Thomas. Perhaps when you're older. She caught herself flushing slightly at the absurdity of her automatic response. We would never be older. That was the entire point. Well, she said, recovering quickly, there will be time to discuss expanded privileges once everyone has adjusted to Eden. For now, focus on settling in and establishing new routines. After she moved on, Thomas smirked. Same old excuses, just in a prettier package. They're nervous, Noah observed quietly. Did you notice the security detail is almost double what it was at the Institute? I had noticed. Despite the relaxed atmosphere they were trying to project, the tension among the staff was palpable. Moving us all to Eden was a risk, bringing all 25 of the first generation together in one location after decades of keeping us carefully separated most of the time. They should be nervous. Thomas muttered, his childish face at odds with the ancient bitterness in his eyes. David, who hadn't spoken a word throughout dinner, suddenly raised his head and looked directly at Dr. Chen across the room. The project director had been watching our table with thinly veiled concern. As David's gaze met his, a look of discomfort crossed Dr. Chen's face, and he quickly turned away. He knows, Lily whispered, noticing the exchange. He suspects, I corrected. But he doesn't know what, and that was our advantage. After 97 years, they thought they knew us. Their eternal children, their compliant test subjects, their successful experiments. They thought they understood our capabilities, our psychology, our potential. They had no idea what we had become in the long, patient decades of our unending childhood. No concept of what nearly a century of observation learning and silent planning had created. They were about to find out. Night fell over Eden, bringing with it a deeper darkness than I'd ever experienced at the Institute, where the lights were never completely extinguished. Through my cottage window, I could see stars, thousands of them, spread across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. I lay in bed for the required 3 hours, breathing deeply and regularly, knowing that my vital signs were being monitored. We'd all learned long ago how to fake sleep convincingly enough to fool the monitors. Our bodies might be frozen in childhood, but we had mastered them in ways the researchers couldn't imagine. At exactly midnight, I carefully slid from beneath my covers. The cottage was dark except for the faint red glow of the surveillance camera indicators. They weren't even trying to hide them here, perhaps thinking that after 97 years we had accepted our constant observation as normal. I moved silently to the closet where I changed into the darkest clothes I'd been provided. Then I went to the bathroom, the one place relatively free of cameras for privacy reasons, though audio monitoring was still likely. I turned on the shower, letting the water run to cover any sounds, and carefully removed the loose tile David had described in his napkin map. Behind it was a small opening barely large enough for my perpetually 12-year-old body to squeeze through. It led to a narrow maintenance tunnel that ran beneath all the cottages, connecting them to the central complex, and more importantly to each other. David had done his research thoroughly, as always. Somehow, in the few hours since our arrival, he had already discovered this network of tunnels and passed the information to us. It was why he had chosen to break his decades of silence to draw that map. This was too important for written notes that might be intercepted. I replaced the tile behind me and crawled through the dusty passage, using my tablet's dimmed screen as a minimal light source. According to David's map, I needed to follow this tunnel for approximately 50 meters, then take the right branch. The meeting place was a small maintenance junction beneath the island's water treatment facility, one of the few locations David had marked as having no surveillance. As I approached, I could hear soft movements indicating that others had already arrived. Noah was there along with Lily and 7 other first-generation subjects. Thomas arrived moments after me, followed by 3 more. Within 15 minutes, all 25 of us were gathered in the cramped space, illuminated only by the dim glow of our tablets. David stood in the center, his silence finally broken after decades. When he spoke, his voice was raspy from disuse, but carried the weight of 97 years of careful observation and planning. "The time has come," he said simply. Those 4 words sent a ripple through our group. We had waited so long for this moment, planned for it, prepared for it, almost given up hope of it ever arriving. "Eden is different," Noah confirmed, stepping forward. "The security is more concentrated, but also more centralized. The staff rotations are longer. Most of them will be living on the island for 3-month cycles. And they've made a critical error," Lily added. "They've given us access to the environmental controls through our tablets. Limited access, supposedly for just temperature and lighting in our cottages, but the system is integrated." "How long?" asked Michael, who had been instrumental in developing our timeline during secret meetings at the Institute. 6 weeks, David replied. "We need to establish patterns first. Let them become comfortable with our compliance. 6 more weeks of pretending, of playing the role of eternal children." It seemed both an eternity and no time at all after 97 years of waiting. "Phase 1 begins tomorrow," David continued. "Each of you knows your assignment. Remember, subtle, gradual, undetectable." We all nodded. Phase 1 was information gathering, each of us responsible for specific areas of Eden's operations, from medical protocols to security rotations to staff backgrounds. "What about the others?" asked Sophia, referring to the later generations of Immortal children still back at the Institute. "The 2nd and 3rd will be coming in 6 months. If we succeed, they'll never have to..." Thomas said firmly. "That's the point." David nodded in agreement. "Our priority must be securing Eden. Once that's accomplished, we can address the liberation of the other generations." Liberation. The word hung in the air, electric with possibility. "Remember," I said, speaking for the first time, "we have the ultimate advantage." "What's that?" asked James, who had been skeptical of our plans from the beginning. I smiled, feeling the weight of my 97 years behind the expression, "Time, we have all the time in the world. They don't." The truth of this settled over the group. Time had always been our prison, but it was also our weapon. We could afford to be patient in ways our captors could not. We could outlast them all. "One last thing," David said, his voice growing softer. "Whatever happens, remember what we agreed. No unnecessary harm to the staff. They're not all guilty." This had been a point of contention in our planning sessions. Some, like Thomas, argued that anyone who participated in keeping us captive deserved whatever came to them. Others, myself included, maintained that many of the staff were simply doing their jobs, unaware of the full ethical implications of Project Eternity. "Agreed," Noah said firmly. "We're not monsters, despite what they've made us." But looking around at my fellow first-generation subjects, 25 immortal children with the minds of the ancient, I wondered if that was entirely true. What were we after all? Not human. Not in the way that humanity defined itself by its mortality. Not children despite our appearances. Not adults having never experienced the physical maturation that shaped adult psychology. We were something entirely new. Something unprecedented in human history. And after 97 years of captivity, observation, and experimentation, we were about to show our creators exactly what they had made. The meeting concluded with a review of our secure communication protocols. We would not risk gathering like this again until absolutely necessary. Instead, we would use the coded language we had developed over decades, passing messages through seemingly innocent interactions that the watching staff would never recognize. One by one. We returned to our cottages through the maintenance tunnels, careful to leave no trace of our midnight gathering. I slipped back into my bathroom, replaced the tile, turned off the shower, and returned to bed, resuming my pattern of deep, regular breathing. Outside my window, the night sky continued its slow wheel of stars, indifferent to the plans of immortal children. Eden slept unaware that its newest inhabitants were anything but the compliant test subjects they appeared to be. In 97 years of forced childhood, we had learned many things. But perhaps the most important was this. Those who see only children are blind to the danger right before their eyes, and blindness in a place like Eden would prove fatal. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Weight of Ancient Youth. The first week at Eden passed in a carefully choreographed dance of compliance and observation. We played our parts perfectly. 25 immortal children settling into our new paradise with appropriate wonder and gratitude. We attended our scheduled medical examinations, participated in the research protocols, and expressed childlike delight at our expanded freedoms. I spent most of my time in the library, a spacious room in the central complex filled with thousands of books, far more than we'd ever had access to at the Institute. The selection was still carefully curated, of course. No works that might inspire rebellion or discontent. Nothing too philosophical about the nature of humanity or the ethics of immortality, but there were enough gaps in their censorship to make it useful. Finding everything you need, Dr. Winters asked on my third day, finding me curled in a window seat with a thick volume of world history. I gave her my best innocent smile. It's amazing to have so many books. The Institute library was so small. Well, we've had nearly a century to collect them, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Though I'm surprised you're interested in history, most of the others have been drawn to the fiction section. Because most of the others were assigned to different areas of reconnaissance, I was responsible for gathering information on Eden's physical infrastructure and historical context. The history books, while sanitized, still contained valuable geographical and political information about the outside world. I like knowing how things happened, I said, which was true enough. And it's interesting to read about events I lived through but never got to experience. Her smile faltered slightly. These moments happened occasionally when one of the staff was suddenly confronted with the reality of our existence. That I had been alive during World War II, the moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of the internet, all while remaining physically 12 years old. Of course, she said, recovering quickly. Your perspective must be fascinating. Have you considered keeping a journal of your observations? The comparative viewpoint of someone who has lived through so much history without physically aging could be invaluable to our research. Would I be allowed to write whatever I wanted? I asked. Watching her carefully, within reason, she replied, which meant no, not really. I'll think about it, I said, returning to my book. After she left, I continued my methodical reading, committing important details to memory, while appearing to simply enjoy the story. 97 years of practice had made me very good at absorbing information, while seeming to do nothing important. That evening, I walked the permitted paths around Eden, carefully noting the locations of security cameras, guard stations, and the subtle barriers that marked the boundaries of our allowed territory. Noah joined me, partway through my walk, falling into step beside me with the easy familiarity of someone I'd known for nearly a century. "Beautiful evening," he commented as we passed a security guard who nodded at us with practiced casualness. "Eden suits its name," I replied, our agreed-upon signal that we could speak freely, or as freely as one ever could in a place built for surveillance. "Have you visited the beach yet?" Noah asked, steering us toward the shoreline where the sound of waves would help mask our conversation. "Not yet. Is it worth seeing?" "Definitely, the western end has the best views." Translation, he had discovered something significant on the western end of the beach. We walked in companionable silence until we reached the sand. The beach was small but picturesque, with white sand and clear blue water. It was also, I noted, surrounded by rocks that formed a natural harbor and a natural barrier. The water might look inviting, but swimming to freedom would be nearly impossible through those jagged formations. "Look at this," Noah said when we reached the western curve of the shoreline. He pointed to what appeared to be a natural rock formation jutting into the water. To a casual observer, we were just two children admiring a beautiful sunset over interesting rocks. But I immediately saw what Noah was showing me. The natural formation housed a disguised dock and what looked like a boat storage facility. "Their supply route," I murmured, kneeling to examine a seashell as cover for our conversation. "And emergency evacuation point." Noah confirmed, 3 boats from what I could see heavily secured, but He let the sentence hang, but not impossible to access with proper planning and timing. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. David was right about the tunnels, I said quietly. They run throughout the island. One connects directly to that facility. Noah nodded, absorbing this information. How's Lily's assignment progressing? Lily had been tasked with charming the medical staff to gather information about the treatment protocols and research objectives. She's made friends with one of the younger doctors. Dr. Patel seems particularly vulnerable to her curious child routines. And Thomas. Working on the security team, he's already identified their rotation patterns and the location of the main security hub. Noah picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water, a perfect childlike activity to maintain our cover. And you finding anything useful in those dusty books? More than they realize, I replied. Did you know Eden isn't just the name they chose for this place? It's actually the project's original code name from the 1940s. Project Eden was the precursor to Project Eternity. Noah raised an eyebrow, his perpetually youthful face serious. You think that's significant? I think nothing they do is without meaning. I said, Eden, the original paradise where humans were innocent and immortal until they gained knowledge and were cast out. Except in our case, they're the ones with the knowledge, and we're the ones who can't leave, Noah observed. For now, I said softly. A subtle beep from our tablets interrupted the conversation, the signal that dinner was being served in the community hall. Another aspect of Eden that was presented as optional but was clearly expected. Those who skipped communal meals too often found themselves subjected to wellness checks and increased monitoring, shall we? Noah asked, offering his arm with exaggerated gallantry that made us look like children playing at being grown-ups. Exactly the image we wanted to project. As we walked back toward the central complex, I glanced over my shoulder at the ocean stretching beyond Eden's boundaries. Somewhere out there was the real world, a world I had never experienced, only read about and glimpsed through carefully filtered media. A world that had changed dramatically over the 97 years of my life while I remained frozen in perpetual prepubescence. What would happen if, when we finally reached that world, would there be a place in it for 25 immortal children with the minds of the ancient? I pushed the thought away. First, we had to secure our freedom. Everything else would come after. 2 weeks into our stay at Eden, the first cracks began to appear in the carefully controlled environment. It started with a power fluctuation, brief but noticeable, causing the lights to dim momentarily throughout the complex. The staff dismissed it as a minor technical issue with the island's power grid. They didn't realize it was Sophia testing the system's vulnerabilities. The next day, one of the security doors between the residential area and the research wing malfunctioned, remaining open for nearly 15 minutes before the error was detected. Again, it was attributed to technical difficulties, the complex systems of Eden still being calibrated. They didn't know it was James who had discovered that certain security protocols could be temporarily overridden if the right sequences were triggered in the environmental control system. Small disruptions continued throughout the week, minor enough to be dismissed as the normal hiccups of a new facility, but frequent enough to keep the staff slightly on edge. It was part of our strategy, create a pattern of small technical issues so that when we implemented larger changes, they would seem like extensions of already existing problems. Meanwhile, we continued gathering information. Lily had succeeded in gaining the trust of Dr. Patel, who had begun sharing details about the current research focus of Project Eternity. They're studying our telomeres now, she reported during a carefully staged game of chess with me in the community recreation room. Cameras monitored us, but as long as we maintained the appearance of normal children's conversation, the content wasn't closely scrutinized. Check, I said, moving my bishop. Anything interesting? They still can't figure out why ours don't shorten. She moved her queen to block my attack. Apparently, the 4th generation is showing similar results to us, but the 5th has some anomalies. This was significant news. The 5th generation children who had received the treatment just 10 years ago were displaying different results than we had. It could mean the researchers were modifying the treatment, perhaps trying to find a version that allowed for some growth while still preventing aging. Dr. Patel mentioned something else. Lily continued, her voice dropping even lower. They're planning to bring some of the second generation here earlier than scheduled next month, not 6 months from now. I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing with the implications. Any particular reason? She didn't say, but she seemed worried. There was an incident at the Institute last week. One of the third generation tried to... Lily glanced around, then moved her knight. Checkmate. I stared at the board, genuinely surprised by her move. Well played. We reset the chess pieces in silence, both processing what this meant. An incident. A suicide attempt, most likely. It wouldn't be the first time. The later generations, especially the third, had higher rates of psychological distress than we did. Unlike us, who had never known any life outside the Institute before Eden, they had grown up with more knowledge of the outside world, more awareness of what they were missing. We need to accelerate the timeline, I murmured as we finished setting up the board for another game. Lily nodded slightly. I'll pass it on. That night, I lay awake in my cottage thinking about the third-generation child who had tried to escape their immortality the only way possible. I understood the impulse. In our second decade, when we had first fully comprehended what had been done to us, that we would never grow up, never age, never experience the natural progression of human life. There had been similar attempts among the first generation. David had been the one to stop it. To make us see that our immortality, while a prison, was also potentially a weapon, that, with enough time and patience, we could find a way to take control of our existence. They will die, he had told us during one of our earliest secret meetings. All of them, the doctors, the researchers, the directors, they will age and die while we remain. If we are patient enough, there will come a time when those who created us are gone, and only those who never knew us as the original experiments remain. That is when we will have our opportunity. He had been right about the first part. We had outlived dozens of researchers, watched generations of doctors come and go, but he had been wrong about the second part. The institutional knowledge of Project Eternity had been carefully preserved and passed down. Each new director, each new research team received the same warnings about us. The dangerous, immortal children who must never be underestimated, which was why Eden represented such a critical juncture. For the first time, we were all together with more freedom of movement than ever before. The security was formidable but centralized. The staff, while vigilant, were fewer in number relative to the vast size of the facility, and most importantly, they still saw us as children, dangerous perhaps, but fundamentally limited by our physical forms and perceived emotional development. It was their greatest mistake, one they would not live long enough to correct. The third week brought rain to Eden, heavy pounding rain that confined us to the central complex and our cottages. It was during this period that David finally made his move. For decades, David had been our de facto leader, the most successful of the original treatments, the most disciplined in maintaining his cover, and the most strategic in planning our eventual liberation. His recent breaking of silence marked a significant turning point in our campaign. On the third day of rain, David appeared at the community breakfast for the first time since our arrival at Eden. His presence caused an immediate stir among the staff. Dr. Chen practically dropped his tablet in his haste to approach David's table. "David," the director said, his surprise evident. "It's good to see you joining us this morning." David looked up with an expression of childlike openness that I knew was entirely manufactured. "Good morning, Dr. Chen. The rain makes it too wet to sit outside." Dr. Chen glanced at Dr. Winters, who hurried over with her own tablet ready. Vid's sudden sociability was considered a major breakthrough. He had been selectively mute for over 4 decades, communicating only through writing when absolutely necessary. "Would you mind if I join you?" Dr. Chen asked, already pulling out a chair. David shrugged, the perfect image of an indifferent preteen. "It's a free country. Or so I've read." The subtle barb wasn't lost on the director, whose smile tightened momentarily before he recovered. "How are you finding Eden, David? Is your cottage comfortable?" "It's fine," David said, taking a bite of his toast. "Different from the Institute. Bigger. Yes, we wanted to give you all more space, more freedom to develop your own routines." Dr. Chen said, his tone carefully modulated to sound casual rather than clinical. "Develop." David repeated, his eyes suddenly sharp. An interesting choice of word for people who are prevented from developing. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Direct references to our condition were rare among us, part of our long-term strategy of appearing to have accepted our fate. I simply meant, I know what you meant. David interrupted, his voice still calm and childlike, despite the adult intelligence behind his words. And I appreciate the effort. Eden is a significant improvement over the Institute. The tension in Dr. Chen's shoulders eased lightly. I'm glad to hear that. Is there anything specific that could make your experience better? And there it was, the opening David had been waiting for. I watched from my table across the room, pretending to be absorbed in my breakfast while listening intently. Actually, yes, David said, his voice brightening with apparent enthusiasm. I've been reading about educational programming, and I was wondering if we could have access to more advanced learning materials specifically. I'm interested in computer science and systems engineering. Dr. Chen blinked clearly, taken aback by the request. That's quite advanced for... He caught himself remembering who he was talking to. I mean, that's certainly something we could consider. Any particular reason for this interest? David smiled innocently. I've had 97 years to study most other subjects. Computers are relatively new, and they keep changing. It seems like an interesting field. It was a masterful performance. David was playing directly into the ongoing debate among the research team about our cognitive development. Some, like Dr. Winters, argued that our intellectual capabilities continued to develop normally despite our physical stasis. Others, including Dr. Chen, maintained that our cognitive development was fundamentally linked to our arrested physical state, limiting our ability to fully grasp abstract adult concepts. By showing interest in advanced technical subjects, David was deliberately provoking this debate and laying the groundwork for our next phase. I'll discuss it with the educational team, Dr. Chen said finally. We might be able to incorporate some basic computer science into your curriculum. Thank you, David replied with perfect politeness. Oh, and one more thing. Would it be possible for me to have some art supplies? I used to enjoy drawing back at the Institute. This more innocuous request seemed to relieve Dr. Chen. Of course, I'll have some delivered to your cottage today. After Dr. Chen left to confer excitedly with Dr. Winters about David's breakthrough, Thomas slid into the empty seat across from David. Subtle, he murmured sarcastically. David shrugged his expression, giving nothing away to the watching cameras. Effective. He was right. By that afternoon, not only had David received an extensive set of art supplies, but his tablet had been updated with access to basic computer science educational modules. More importantly, the security around his cottage had been subtly relaxed, with monitoring reduced to allow him space to continue his positive development. It was exactly as we had predicted. The researchers were so eager for signs of normal childhood interests and development that they would overlook potential security concerns in favor of encouraging such behavior. That night, while the rain continued to pound against the windows of Eden, David began the work that would ultimately lead to our liberation, using his new art supplies to create detailed schematics of Eden's systems that would be dismissed as childish drawings by any observer, and using his educational access to probe the digital architecture that controlled every aspect of our prison paradise. By the fourth week, patterns had been established. The staff had grown accustomed to our routines, who spent time where, who socialized with whom, who participated enthusiastically in activities, and who preferred solitude. They had begun to relax slightly, their vigilance dulled by our perfect compliance and apparent contentment. It was time for Phase 2. Phase 2 began with a simple question from me to Dr. Winters during my weekly medical examination. Have you ever thought about what would happen if the treatment could be reversed? Her hands stilled on her tablet. Reversed? You mean if we could undo the immortality effect? I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, curious, but not overly emotional. I was reading about gene therapy and CRISPR technology. It made me wonder if the same principles could be applied to reverse engineer what was done to us. Dr. Winters set down her tablet, giving me her full attention. This was unusual. Typically, she maintained a professional distance, recording observations without engaging too deeply in philosophical discussions about our condition. It's an interesting question. she said carefully. There have been some theoretical discussions about reversibility, but the fundamental changes to your cellular structure are extremely complex and interwoven. Reversing one aspect could potentially cause catastrophic failures in other systems. So we're stuck like this forever, I said, allowing a slight tremor in my voice, just enough to suggest emotional vulnerability without setting off alarm bells. Eleanor, she said, using my preferred name for once. I know it's difficult. The situation is unprecedented, but the research continues to advance. The 5th generation is already showing differences from your cohort. What kind of differences? I asked, though Lily had already told me some of this information. Dr. Winters hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. They still don't age, but there appears to be some limited physical development possible. Very slow, very controlled, but present. So they might actually reach 13 someday. I asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. It's possible, she admitted. But we're still in the early observation phase with them. It could take decades to confirm whether the development continues or plateaus. Decades. More children sentenced to an extended childhood while researchers watched and waited more subjects. In the grand experiment. Do you ever think about the ethics of it all? I asked quietly, creating children who can never grow up. Dr. Winter's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine discomfort. The original Project Eternity researchers believed they were working toward a cure for aging, a way to prolong healthy human life. The side effect of developmental arrest wasn't anticipated. But once they knew they kept making more of us, I pointed out 5 generations of immortal children. The potential benefits to humanity. She began, then stopped herself. Yes, there are serious ethical questions. Many of us on the current research team are focused on finding ways to allow for normal development while maintaining the positive aspects of cellular regeneration. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with any researcher in decades. Something had shifted in Dr. Winters since our move to Eden. Perhaps proximity to all 25 of us together had forced her to confront the reality of what had been done more directly than the compartmentalized environment of the Institute had allowed. Thank you for being honest, I said, adding just enough warmth to my voice to reinforce this new openness between us. She smiled, clearly relieved by my response. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss today? I shook my head. Just one thing. Would it be possible for me to access more detailed information about the current research? Not necessarily about the original treatment. I understand that's classified, but about the ongoing work with the later generations. It was a bold request, one that would have been immediately denied at the Institute. But here at Eden, with the new emphasis on our development and autonomy, there was a chance. Dr. Winters considered for a moment. I'll need to discuss it with Dr. Chen. There might be some summary reports that would be appropriate to share. Your perspective could actually be valuable. You've lived with this condition longer than anyone, I nodded gratefully. I'd appreciate that. Sometimes I think it might be easier to accept everything if I understood it better. Another calculated statement designed to appeal to the researchers' fundamental belief that knowledge and understanding were inherently positive. I'll see what I can do, she promised as she concluded the examination. As I left the medical wing, I passed Noah heading in for his own appointment. We exchanged the briefest of glances. His slightly raised eyebrow asking if my part of Phase 2 had been successful, my subtle nod confirming that it had. One by one, throughout the day, each of the first generation implemented their portion of Phase 2, small requests. Casual questions, minor behaviors that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively would shift the dynamics of Eden in our favor. Sophia asked for access to the greenhouse, expressing a sudden interest in botany. James requested permission to help with maintenance tasks around the central complex, claiming boredom and a desire to be useful. Lily started a book club with several of the younger researchers focused on classic literature that happened to contain themes of freedom and rebellion. Thomas, always the most daring, directly approached the head of security with a proposal to establish a junior security program to give us a sense of responsibility and purpose. He argued with wide-eyed earnestness. By the end of the week, most of these requests had been granted in some form. Not exactly as asked, but with enough concessions to serve our purposes. The staff of Eden, eager to see signs of normal development and engagement, were unwittingly giving us the very tools we needed to undermine their control. On the last night of the 4th week, as a brilliant sunset painted Eden in hues of gold and crimson, I sat on the small porch of my cottage, watching the researchers and security personnel move between buildings in the central complex. From this vantage point, I could see most of the residential area. 25 identical blue-roofed cottages arranged in a perfect circle, our gilded cage masquerading as independence. Noah joined me, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, another small freedom we'd been granted at Eden, the ability to prepare simple food and drinks in our own cottages. "Beautiful evening," he said, handing me one of the cups. "Eden suits its name," I replied, our signal that we could speak relatively freely. He settled into the chair beside mine. To any observer, we were just 2 children enjoying the sunset together. A sweet, innocent tableau that masked the reality of our 97 years of existence and the weight of our plans. "Phase 2 is proceeding better than expected," Noah murmured between sips of his drink. "David's requested computer access has been upgraded twice already. He's nearly through the first firewall." I nodded slightly. "Dr. Winters has granted me limited access to the research database, mostly redacted files, but there's useful information between the lines. And Thomas actually has a security badge now," Noah added with a touch of disbelief. "Limited access, but still, they gave Thomas a security badge. It was almost funny how willing they were to see what they wanted to see. Children engaging with their environment, showing healthy interest in adult activities, developing in the ways that their arrested bodies couldn't. The real test comes next week," I said quietly, "when we begin Phase 3. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of our plan, the point at which subtle information gathering and position improvement shifted to active manipulation of Eden's systems. It was also the point of no return. Once we began actively tampering with security and communications, detection was inevitable. The only question was whether we could accomplish enough before they realized what was happening. "Are we still agreed on the timeline?" Noah asked, his voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "David thinks we should move it up," I replied. "With the 2nd generation arriving earlier than expected, we may have only 2 more weeks before security protocols change." Noah considered this, his eternally youthful face serious beneath his tousled blonde hair. "It doesn't give us much margin for error. We've had 97 years to plan," I reminded him, "and we may never get another opportunity like Eden." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. Then, raising his voice to normal levels for the benefit of any listening devices, he said, "Do you want to play cards after dinner?" James found a deck in the recreation room. "Sure," I replied with childlike enthusiasm. "Maybe Dr. Patel will join us. She said she knows some good card games." And so we continued our performance, the eternal children of Eden, content in our paradise, grateful for our immortality, while beneath the surface, the countdown to revolution ticked steadily forward. That night I dreamed of growing old. It was a recurring dream that had haunted me for decades, the only place where I experienced the passage of time in my own body. In the dream, I would look into a mirror and see myself aging year by year, my childish features lengthening and maturing, my body growing and changing, lines eventually appearing around my eyes, gray, threading through my hair. Sometimes the dream was peaceful, a gentle progression through the natural stages of life. Other times, like tonight, it was accelerated and terrifying. My body, aging decades in minutes, withering before my eyes, skin sagging and spotting bones becoming visible beneath papery flesh, until finally I was ancient and decrepit, falling apart with each labored breath. I woke gasping, my heart pounding in my perpetually 12-year-old chest. For a moment, I lay still in the darkness, feeling the smooth skin of my face, the small hands that had never grown the body that had been frozen in time for 85 years. The clock on my bedside table read 3:17 a.m. I knew from experience that sleep would not return easily after this dream. Slipping out of bed, I moved to the window and looked out at Eden under moonlight. The central complex glowed with security lighting, and I could see the silhouettes of night shift guards making their rounds. Our cottages were dark, though I knew that at least some of my fellow immortals were awake, planning, preparing, or simply staring at the ceiling as I had been 97 years old. 85 years of being 12. 85 birthdays with a single candle. I thought of the outside world, a place I had never experienced except through books, carefully curated films, and sanitized news reports. A world that had transformed multiple times during my long childhood. Horse-drawn carriages had given way to cars which had evolved from noisy smoking machines to sleek electric vehicles. Telephones had moved from operators and party lines to smartphones and virtual reality. Wars had been fought, borders redrawn, nations born and dissolved. And through it all, I had remained here unchanging, watching through a window of filtered information, my body frozen while my mind continued to grow and develop in ways the researchers could never fully understand or measure. What would freedom mean for us? Even if our plan succeeded, even if we escaped Eden and the Institute. What place could there be in the world for 25 immortal children? Would we be hunted, studied, exploited? Would we find ourselves in a different kind of cage, trading the clinical confinement of Project Eternity for some other form of captivity? These questions had been debated endlessly in our secret meetings over the decades. David maintained that freedom, whatever its challenges, was preferable to our current existence. Thomas argued that we should focus on securing control of Project Eternity itself, becoming the administrators rather than the subjects. Others suggested finding a remote location where we could live in isolation away from the complications of human society. I had never fully aligned with any of these visions. What I wanted was simpler and perhaps more impossible, the chance to live a normal human life with all its messiness and mortality, to grow up, grow old, and eventually die. To experience the full arc of human existence instead of being trapped in its beginning stages forever. But that option had been taken from me the moment the original treatment had been administered. Even if, as Dr. Winter suggested, they were making progress with the 5th generation, it was too late for us, the first. Our cellular structure had been permanently altered. Our immortality was irreversible. All we could do now was take control of that immortality, decide for ourselves how we would exist in the world rather than allowing others to decide for us. With that thought, I returned to bed, lying awake until dawn painted Eden in the pale light of a new day, one day closer to the revolution that would either free us or destroy us all. Week 5 brought sunshine back to Eden, along with the beginning of Phase 3. It started with a minor security breach in the medical research wing, a file access that shouldn't have been possible, attributed to a system glitch. The security team spent hours checking and rechecking permissions, never suspecting that David had created a ghost access point that allowed us to move through the digital architecture of Eden like ghosts through walls. Next came a series of small power fluctuations affecting different areas of the complex at different times. Nothing major enough to trigger emergency protocols, but persistent enough to require maintenance staff to check the electrical systems throughout Eden. While they were distracted by these apparent technical issues, James, who had successfully inserted himself into the maintenance team as a helper, was mapping the physical infrastructure of the power grid, identifying critical nodes and potential failure points. Sophia, with her newly granted access to the greenhouse, was quietly cultivating several plant species with sedative properties, extracting and concentrating their active compounds during her solo botany study time. The resulting clear liquid, odorless and tasteless, was being stored in small vials hidden throughout our cottages. Lily's book club had evolved into a discussion group that now included nearly half the research staff. Through carefully guided conversations about fictional rebellions and revolutions, she was gathering psychological intelligence which staff members showed sympathy toward oppressed groups, which held rigid authoritarian views, which might be persuaded to help us if the situation were presented in the right light. Thomas, with his limited security access, had identified every camera blind spot in Eden, every patrol gap, every weak point in the perimeter monitoring. He had also managed to accidentally damage 2 of the security doors during his junior security training, requiring them to be temporarily reset to manual override, a fact he immediately shared with the rest of us through our coded communication system. And I was building a relationship with Dr. Winters, a calculated connection designed to position me as the reasonable voice among the first generation, the one who could be trusted, the bridge between the research team and my fellow immortals. "I've brought you something," Dr. Winters said during our weekly checkup, sliding a tablet across the examination table. "It's not the full research database, but it contains summaries of the current work with all 5 generations. I accepted it with carefully measured gratitude. "Thank you. This means a lot to me." I had to convince Dr. Chen, she confided, leaning closer. He's still concerned about how much information should be shared with the subjects. Subjects, I repeated softly. After 97 years, we're still just subjects. Dr. Winters had the grace to look embarrassed. It's the scientific terminology. It doesn't reflect how we see you, how I see you. And how do you see me, Dr. Winters? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated, then said, I see a remarkable person who has lived through an extraordinary circumstance with incredible resilience. Someone who deserves respect and consideration. It was more than I had expected, a glimpse of genuine humanity beneath the clinical exterior. For a moment, I felt a twinge of regret about what was coming. Dr. Winters wasn't the worst of them. She genuinely seemed to care about our welfare within the constraints of her role. But caring wasn't enough. Good intentions weren't enough. Not after 97 years of captivity. I appreciate that. I said, meaning it more than she could know. And I appreciate this, I added, holding up the tablet. Trust has to start somewhere. She smiled, relieved by my response. I hope this is the beginning of a more open relationship between the research team and the first generation. Eden represents a new approach, a less clinical environment. We want it to feel more like a home than a research facility. A home we can never leave, I pointed out gently. Her smile faltered. The situation is complicated, Eleanor. The world isn't ready to know about Project Eternity. There would be panic, religious upheaval, ethical debates, not to mention the risk to your safety if your condition became public knowledge. So we remain a secret forever, all 5 generations of us. Dr. Winters sighed. Not forever, but these things require careful planning, gradual introduction. The 5th generation research is focused on creating a version of the treatment that allows for normal development with enhanced longevity. If that succeeds, there could be a path to integration with wider society. But not for us, I said. Not for the 1st generation. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. After the examination, I took the tablet back to my cottage and began systematically working through the files. Most contained information. We already knew the basic parameters of each generation's treatment, the observed results, the ongoing monitoring protocols. But there were new details as well, particularly about the 5th generation. The latest subjects were indeed showing signs of very slow physical development, approximately 1/10 the normal human rate. At that pace, it would take them 120 years to fully mature into adults, but it was development nonetheless, something we of the 1st generation would never experience. More concerning was a reference to containment preparedness protocols, scheduled to be implemented at Eden within the next 2 weeks, coinciding with the early arrival of the 2nd generation. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. Security was about to be significantly enhanced. Our window of opportunity was closing faster than we had anticipated that evening. During a seemingly casual gathering in the recreation room, I passed this information to the others through our coded conversations. David, who rarely participated in social activities, but had made an exception tonight, absorbed the news with a barely perceptible nod. Time for stars, he said softly, our signal for an emergency meeting that night. As we dispersed for the evening, returning to our cottages under the watchful eyes of Eden's security systems, I felt the weight of nearly a century of waiting coming to a head. After decades of patience and planning, events were now moving rapidly toward a conclusion that would determine the rest of our potentially endless lives. Would we succeed in our bid for freedom? Or would we find ourselves in an even more secure facility? Our brief taste of relative autonomy at Eden revoked as punishment for our rebellion. The night sky above Eden was clear and brilliant with stars that had shone on my birth 97 years ago. That would likely still be shining long after everyone on this island was dead. Everyone except us, the children who couldn't die. The maintenance tunnel was more crowded than usual that night. All 25 of the 1st generation had assembled, squeezed into the junction beneath the water treatment facility. The risk of such a large gathering was significant, but the urgency of our situation demanded it. David stood in the center, his voice low but commanding. The timeline has accelerated. We need to move within the next 10 days before the security upgrades are implemented. 10 days, Michael questioned. That's not enough time to complete Phase 3. We'll have to compress phases 3 and 4, Noah replied. Run them concurrently instead of sequentially. Phase 4 was the actual takeover of Eden, the culmination of our plan that would give us control of the facility and leverage to negotiate our freedom. That increases the risk of detection, Sophia pointed out. If they realize what we're doing before we've secured the critical systems, they'll lock everything down and we'll lose our chance, Thomas finished for her. But David's right. We don't have a choice. It's now or potentially never. I listened to the debate weighing the risks against the narrowing window of opportunity. What about the secondary systems? I asked. The backup generators, the emergency protocols. James and I have mapped most of them. Lily reported. We can disable the primary connections, but some of the overrides are hardwired. We'll need physical access to the security hub, which means we need the sedative ready, Sophia added. I've produced enough for approximately 15 adults, but it needs another week to reach full potency. We don't have another week, David said firmly. We'll need to use what we have and compensate with other measures. The discussion continued, each of us reporting on our areas of responsibility, adjusting plans, identifying vulnerabilities and solutions. After nearly a century together, we worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine, our different strengths and perspectives combining into a single focused purpose. What about the night of the welcome dinner for the second generation? Suggested James. Most of the staff will be gathered in one location if we can introduce Sophia's sedative into the food or drinks. Too risky, Noah countered. If it affects some people but not others, we'll lose the element of surprise. We need a more controlled approach. The system test, I said, suddenly remembering something I'd seen in the files on Dr. Winter's tablet. There's a full system diagnostic scheduled 3 days from now. All security and environmental systems will be cycling through test protocols for approximately 43 minutes. David's eyes lit up with interest. During which certain safeguards will be temporarily suspended, and most of the technical staff will be focused on monitoring the test results, Thomas added, catching on to the possibility. It's still risky, Lily cautioned. We'd be operating with a very tight time frame. Everything about this is risky, David replied. But a planned system test gives us cover for any anomalies our actions might create. The staff will attribute unusual patterns to the diagnostic procedures. After further discussion, we reached a consensus we would initiate our takeover during the system diagnostic. The next 3 days would be spent in intensive preparation, finalizing our access to critical systems, positioning resources, and setting up the sequence of actions that would give us control of Eden. As we prepared to return to our cottages, David addressed us one final time. Remember, our goal is control, not harm. The staff are not our enemies. They're obstacles. Once we have secured Eden, we'll have leverage to negotiate our terms. And if negotiation fails, Thomas asked, ever the pragmatist. David's young face was ancient with resolve. Then we have contingency plans. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. We dispersed silently, returning to our cottages through the network of maintenance tunnels. As I replaced the bathroom tile that concealed my access point, I considered the enormity of what we were about to attempt. In 3 days, we would make our bid for freedom. 25 immortal children against the full might of Project Eternity and whatever government agencies stood behind it. The odds were not in our favor. But then we had defied the fundamental odds of human existence by living for nearly a century without aging a day. Perhaps we could defy these odds as well. The next morning, I awoke to an unexpected summons from Dr. Chen. This was unusual. My regular interactions were with Dr. Winters, not the project director himself. A change in routine 3 days before our planned action was concerning. I found Dr. Chen in his office in the central complex. A spacious room with large windows overlooking Eden. Dr. Winters was there as well, along with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, lean, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Eleanor, thank you for coming, Dr. Chen said, gesturing to an empty chair. This is Director Blackwood from the Oversight Committee. He's visiting Eden to assess our progress. I nodded politely, assessing the newcomer while maintaining my carefully cultivated expression of childlike openness. Director Blackwood studied me with unnerving intensity, his gray eyes missing nothing. "So, this is Subject 3, he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such an imposing figure. "One of the originals." "Eleanor prefers to be called by her name," Dr. Winters interjected, surprising me with her small act of advocacy. Blackwood's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Of course, Eleanor. How are you finding Eden?" "It's very nice," I replied neutrally. "Much more pleasant than the Institute." "I'm glad to hear it." His tone suggested he didn't particularly care either way. "I understand Dr. Winters has been sharing some research information with you." So, that was what this was about. I glanced at Dr. Winters, who looked uncomfortable but not apologetic. "Just summary reports," I said. "It's been helpful to understand more about the different generations of the project." Blackwood turned to Dr. Chen. "And you authorized this information sharing?" Dr. Chen shifted in his seat. Dr. Winters made a compelling case for a more transparent approach with the first generation. Given their cognitive development and the duration of their involvement with the project, there seemed little risk in sharing redacted summaries. "I see." Blackwood returned his attention to me. "And what have you learned from these summaries, Eleanor?" I chose my words carefully, aware that this conversation could have significant implications for our plans. "I've learned that the fifth generation is showing signs of development that we never experienced, that the project has evolved from simply studying immortality to trying to create a version that allows for growth and maturation." "And how does that make you feel?" Blackwood asked, watching me closely. It was the kind of direct psychological probing we rarely encountered from the regular staff. I maintained my composure, giving him the response that would seem most natural for a perpetual child who had just learned others might have what she could never possess. "It's hard to know that we'll never grow up," I said, allowing a hint of genuine emotion to color my voice. "That the newer subjects might get to experience things we never will. But I understand why the research continues to evolve." Blackwood nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "The first generation's contribution to science cannot be overstated. Without your cohort, the advancements we've made with the fifth generation would have been impossible." It was the same platitude we'd heard for decades, our eternal childhood justified by the scientific knowledge it provided. The sacrifice of 25 normal lives balanced against the potential benefits for humanity. Will the fifth generation be brought to Eden eventually? I asked, partly to shift attention away from myself, and partly because the answer could affect our long-term plans. "That depends on the results of the current observation phase," Dr. Chen answered. "The modified treatment they received requires different monitoring protocols than the earlier generations. In fact," Blackwood added, "the second generation's transfer has been moved up specifically to test Eden's capacity for multi-generational housing. If successful, we may accelerate the timeline for integrating the third generation as well." This was new information and potentially problematic for our plans. More subjects meant more complexity, more variables, more potential for things to go wrong. "When exactly will the second generation arrive?" I asked, trying to sound merely curious. "The first group arrives in 4 days." Dr. Chen replied, "Just after the quarterly system diagnostic. 4 days, 1 day after our planned takeover. If we succeeded, we would be in control when the second generation arrived. If we failed, their transfer would likely be canceled, and Eden would be locked down tighter than ever." The stakes had just gotten even higher. "Is there anything else you'd like to ask Director Blackwood?" I kept my tone respectful, playing the role of the cooperative subject. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Just one thing, Eleanor. In your 97 years of life, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned?" It was an unexpected question, philosophical rather than clinical. I considered my answer, carefully aware that whatever I said would be analyzed for signs of rebellious thinking or psychological instability. "That time changes everything," I said finally. "Except us." A shadow of something respect perhaps crossed Blackwood's face. An astute observation. "Thank you for your time, Eleanor. You may return to your regular activities now." As I left the office, I could feel Blackwood's eyes following me. The unexpected visit from the Oversight Committee was concerning. Had they detected something? Were they suspicious of our activities? Or was this simply a routine inspection that happened to coincide with our plans? I needed to warn the others. Director Blackwood's presence complicated things, but it didn't change the fundamental reality our window of opportunity was rapidly closing. We had to act during the system diagnostic, regardless of the increased risk. As I walked back to my cottage, I passed Noah on the path. Library later, I asked casually our code for an urgent update. He nodded, his expression unchanged, but his eyes alert. After lunch, 3 days until the system diagnostic. 3 days until we made our bid for freedom. 3 days that would determine whether we remained experimental subjects forever or finally took control of our immortal lives. The countdown had begun, and the library was busy that afternoon, a deliberate choice on our part as conversations in populated areas were less likely to receive focused surveillance. Noah, Thomas, Lily, and I sat at a table near the biography section, ostensibly discussing a book about historical explorers. Director Blackwood is from the Oversight Committee, I explained quietly, turning a page in the book for the benefit of any watching cameras. He's here to assess Eden before the second generation arrives. Timing is suspicious. Thomas murmured, his fingers tracing a line of text, as if following along with his reading. Does he suspect something? Lily asked, her voice barely audible. I shook my head slightly. I don't think so. He seemed more interested in Dr. Winters sharing information with us than in our activities. Still, Noah said, another high-level observer complicates things. We need to warn David. Already done. I confirmed. I passed him in the garden on my way here. He's sticking to the planned system diagnostic in 3 days. What about the second-generation transfer? Thomas asked. If they're arriving the day after, it could work in our favor, Noah pointed out. If we control Eden when they arrive, we'll have more leverage and potentially more allies. The second-generation 50 children who had received the immortality treatment in the 1970s were in many ways similar to us. They had also lived decades in arrested development. Though they hadn't experienced quite the same length of captivity, some of them might be sympathetic to our cause. Others might be too institutionalized, too dependent on the structure of Project Eternity to accept the radical change we were planning. We should prepare for both scenarios. I suggested, assume some will join us and others won't. The others nodded in agreement. We spent the next hour discussing contingency plans, all disguised as an animated book discussion for any observers. By the time we dispersed, we had refined our approach to account for Blackwood's presence and the imminent arrival of the second generation. As I left the library, Dr. Winters was entering. She smiled warmly at me. Enjoying some reading, Eleanor? Yes, historical biographies today. It's fascinating to read about people who live such different lives in different times. Her expression softened with that familiar mix of pity and scientific interest. I'm sure it is. How are you feeling after the meeting with Director Blackwood this morning? He can be somewhat intimidating. He was fine, I said with a carefully calibrated shrug. Just curious about the information you've been sharing with me. Dr. Winters sighed. Yes, well, the Oversight Committee tends to be more conservative in their approach to subject interaction, but I stand by my decision. You have every right to understand the research that directly affects your life. Thank you for that, I said, genuinely appreciating her small act of rebellion against the institutional hierarchy. It means a lot. She hesitated, then lowered her voice slightly. Between us, Director Blackwood is really here to assess whether Eden can serve as a permanent solution for all 5 generations. If the integration of the second generation goes well, they'll likely accelerate the timeline for the others. This was valuable information confirmation that Eden represented a significant shift in Project Eternity's approach, not just for us, but for all the immortal children. Is that a good thing? I asked, watching her reaction. I think so, she replied, her conviction seeming genuine. Eden offers a much better quality of life than the Institute. More space, more freedom, more opportunity for normal social development. Normal social development. As if anything about our situation could ever be normal. Well, I hope it works out, I said, maintaining my cooperative facade. It would be nice to see the others again. Dr. Winters smiled approvingly. That's a very mature perspective, Eleanor. I'll be sure to mention it in my report to Director Blackwood." As she continued into the library, I felt a twinge of something like regret. Dr. Winters genuinely believed she was working toward improving our lives. She didn't understand that no gilded cage, no matter how spacious or comfortable, could ever be acceptable to beings with the minds of adults who had lived for nearly a century. Freedom couldn't be granted in increments. It had to be taken. The next 2 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Each of us focused on our assigned tasks, maintaining our normal routines while secretly laying the groundwork for our imminent action. David continued to cultivate his new interest in computer science, spending hours on the educational modules that were actually serving as his cover for probing Eden's digital architecture. By the end of the second day, he had created backdoor access to most of the primary systems disguised as regular maintenance protocols. Sophia finalized her sedative solution, distributing small vials to each of us according to our assigned roles in the plan. The liquid was clear and tasteless, designed to induce a deep but non-harmful sleep when added to food or drink. Thomas used his junior security position to memorize guard rotations and identify the most vulnerable points in the surveillance system. He also accidentally damaged 2 more security cameras, necessitating repairs that Lily then used as an opportunity to plant small signal jammers disguised as ordinary electrical components. Noah worked with the medical staff, feigning interest in the research protocols to gain insight into which staff members would be where during the system diagnostic. He also managed to access the medication storage area, where he replaced several key sedatives with weakened solutions that would be less effective if used against us. James continued his helpful participation in maintenance tasks, using the opportunity to place small devices at strategic points throughout Eden's infrastructure, devices that could disrupt power communications or security systems when activated, and I maintained my developing relationship with Dr. Winters, using our increasingly open conversations to gather the final pieces of intelligence we needed about the command structure and emergency protocols of Eden. All of this was done under the watchful eyes of Director Blackwood, who seemed to be everywhere at once, observing our activities, questioning staff members, reviewing security procedures. His presence added an extra layer of tension to our preparations, but also provided useful cover. The staff was so focused on presenting Eden in the best light for the director that they were paying less attention to subtle anomalies in our behavior. On the evening before the system diagnostic, I sat on my cottage porch watching the sunset paint Eden in shades of orange and pink. Despite the beauty of the scene, my mind was occupied with the countless ways our plan could fail, the potential consequences of failure, and the uncertain future that awaited us, even if we succeeded. What would freedom look like for 25 immortal children? Where could we go that we wouldn't be immediately recognized as abnormal, studied, feared, or exploited? What kind of life could we build outside the controlled environment of Project Eternity? These questions had no easy answers. But after 97 years of captivity, the chance to find our own answers, to make our own choices, even if they proved difficult or dangerous, was worth any risk. As darkness fell over Eden, I sent a final message to the others through our coded communication system. Tomorrow, we become the masters of our fate. The responses came back, gradually disguised as ordinary activities, lights turned on and off in specific patterns, music played at certain volumes, seemingly random appearances on porches or at windows, all conveying the same message: ready. That night I slept more soundly than I had in decades, the peace of a decision finally made after years of waiting. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, we would either gain our freedom or lose what little autonomy we had managed to carve out for ourselves. Tomorrow, Eden would fall. The day of the system diagnostic dawned clear and bright. The island paradise of Eden, seemingly oblivious to the revolution about to unfold within its boundaries, I went through my morning routine with meticulous normality: breakfast at the community hall, a walk around the central garden, a visit to the library. Dr. Winters found me there, browsing through the science section. "There you are, Eleanor. I wanted to let you know that there will be a system diagnostic this afternoon. You might notice some flickering lights or brief interruptions in tablet functionality. Nothing to be concerned about. Thank you for letting me know," I replied with just the right amount of casual interest. "How long will it last?" About 45 minutes, starting at 2 p.m. Most of the technical staff will be monitoring the process, so if you need anything during that time, you might have to wait a bit. I understand. I'll probably just read in my cottage during that time." She nodded approvingly. "That's probably best. Some of the recreational equipment might power cycle during the diagnostic." After she left, I selected a book and made my way back to my cottage, noting the increased activity around the central complex as the technical team prepared for the diagnostic. Security seemed normal. No additional guards, no heightened alert status. Either they truly suspected nothing or they were being very subtle about their precautions. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I received the first signal, a seemingly innocent text message on my tablet from Lily about her book club meeting that contained our activation code embedded in the wording. Similar messages would be going out to all 25 of us, confirming that the plan was proceeding at 1:50 p.m. I placed Sophia's vial of sedative in my pocket and changed into the darkest clothes I owned, not obviously different from my normal attire, but better suited for the activities to come. At 1:55 p.m., I sat by my cottage window, tablet in hand, watching the central complex for the visual signal that would indicate the diagnostic had begun a brief flickering of the exterior lights. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the lights flickered. 3 seconds later, my tablet chimed with an automated message. "System diagnostic in progress. Some features may be temporarily unavailable." It had begun. I waited 30 seconds, the time needed for David to activate his backdoor access to the primary systems, then left my cottage and headed toward the medical wing of the central complex. My assigned role in the first phase was to ensure Dr. Winters and the medical team were neutralized without harm. As I walked, I noted other members of the first generation also moving with purpose toward their assigned targets. Noah heading for the communications center, Thomas toward the security hub, Sophia to the staff cafeteria, James to the power distribution node. We moved quickly but not urgently, our paths calculated to appear normal to any watching eyes until the moment we converged on our objectives. The medical wing was unusually quiet when I arrived. Most of the staff were either monitoring the diagnostic or taking a late lunch break. Dr. Winters was in her office, focused on her computer screen, which displayed rows of fluctuating data from the diagnostic. I knocked on her open door. "Dr. Winters, do you have a moment?" She looked up, momentarily distracted from the diagnostic results. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "Actually, I'm feeling a bit strange," I said, placing a hand on my forehead. "I think I might have a fever." Concern immediately replaced her distraction. She stood up and came around the desk. "Let me check. You've never had a fever before. It could be significant." As she reached out to feel my forehead, I stumbled slightly, bumping into the small table where her tea sat cooling. "Sorry," I mumbled, steadying myself while surreptitiously emptying Sophia's vial into the cup. "It's all right," Dr. Winters said, placing a cool hand on my forehead. "You don't feel warm, but your color is off. Let me get the thermometer." She turned to retrieve the medical equipment, then paused to take a sip of her tea. I watched, calculating the timing in my head. Sophia had said the sedative would take effect within 60 to 90 seconds. "Your vital signs have been stable for decades," Dr. Winters was saying as she located the thermometer. "Any deviation could be important. Data could." She frowned suddenly, placing a hand on her desk to steady herself. "That's odd. I feel dizzy. Maybe you should sit down," I suggested, guiding her back to her chair. "Yes, Her words slurred slightly. "Something's not... I can't." "It's all right," I said as her eyelids began to droop. "You're just going to sleep for a while. You won't be harmed." Understanding flickered in her eyes for the briefest moment before they closed completely. "Eleanor," she murmured, "what have you done?" And then she was unconscious, her breathing deep and regular. I quickly checked her pulse, normal and strong, just as Sophia had promised. Then I moved to the door and placed the small signal jammer on the frame, activating it with a press. The security camera in the corner of the office went dark. Phase 1. Complete. I quickly bound Dr. Winters' hands and feet with medical restraints from her own cabinet, then gagged her with a strip of gauze. It wouldn't hold her if she woke. The restraints were intentionally loose enough to prevent injury, but it would slow her down long enough for us to respond. Next, I moved through the medical wing, finding and neutralizing the 3 other staff members present with similar methods. A spilled drink here, and offered candy there, each laced with Sophia's sedative. Within 10 minutes, the entire medical section was secure. I sent the confirmation signal through my tablet, a seemingly innocent message about feeling better after seeing Dr. Winters that contained our success code. Then I moved to Phase 2, accessing the medical database to disable the tracking implants that each of us carried beneath our skin. The tiny devices monitored our vital signs and location, feeding constant data to the Eden surveillance system. We couldn't remove them without surgery, but we could desynchronize them from the central system, creating ghost signals that would show us in our cottages even as we moved freely throughout Eden. The medical database required Dr. Winter's security credentials, which I had carefully memorized after weeks of subtle observation. As I entered her ID and password, I felt a momentary pang of guilt. She had shown me more kindness than most, had advocated for greater freedom and information sharing. In another circumstance, she might have been an ally rather than an obstacle. But 97 years of captivity left no room for half measures. Eden had to fall, and everyone associated with it had to be neutralized, regardless of their individual merits. The database accepted the credentials, and I quickly navigated to the tracking system. Following David's precise instructions, I executed the command sequence that would loop our vital sign data and location markers for the next 6 hours. More than enough time to complete our takeover of Eden Phase 2 complete. My tablet chimed with an incoming message from Noah. Communications secure, proceed to Phase 3. Phase 3 was the centralization of control, moving from individual system access to comprehensive command of Eden's infrastructure. For this, we needed physical access to the central hub located in the basement of the main complex. I left the medical wing, making my way toward the designated meeting point near the central stairwell. As I walked, I monitored the incoming signals from the others. Security hub secured. Thomas power systems under control. James, staff neutralized in zones 3-7. Sophia, perimeter defenses disabled. Michael. We were proceeding faster than expected, the system diagnostic providing perfect cover for our activities. Any anomalies in Eden's systems were being attributed to the diagnostic itself, giving us precious extra minutes before anyone realized what was happening. I arrived at the stairwell to find Noah and Thomas already waiting, their expressions tense but determined. "Any complications?" Noah asked quietly. "None," I replied. "Medical wing secure tracking systems looped. Dr. Winters and her team are sedated and restrained." Security was similarly smooth. Thomas reported. The guards were focused on the external monitors during the diagnostic. They never saw us coming. "Communications are completely isolated," Noah added. "No signals in or out of Eden without our authorization." A moment later, Lily joined us, slightly out of breath. "Research section secure. I had to use a bit more sedative on Dr. Chen. He was resistant to the first dose." "And Blackwood?" I asked, suddenly realizing the director hadn't been mentioned in any of the reports. Lily frowned. "Not in his assigned location. Has anyone reported securing him?" We checked our tablets, scanning the incoming status reports from the rest of the first generation. No mention of Blackwood. "This is a problem," Thomas said grimly. "If he realizes what's happening, he can't communicate with the outside," Noah pointed out. "Not with the systems we've already secured. But he could still trigger internal emergency protocols," I countered. "We need to find him before proceeding to Phase 3, Lily nodded. "I'll coordinate a search with the others. You 3 continue to the central hub as planned." She slipped away, already sending coded messages to the rest of our group. Noah, Thomas, and I proceeded down the stairwell toward the basement level where Eden's central control hub was located. The hub was behind a heavy security door that would normally require multiple high-level authorizations to access. But David had spent weeks creating a bypass sequence, which Thomas now executed with quick, precise movements on the security panel. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large room filled with servers, monitoring stations, and control panels. The technological heart of Eden. At the central console stood David, his young face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. "Right on schedule," he said, without looking up from his work. 93% of systems secured. Surveillance offline. External communications blocked internal doors under our control. Director Blackwood is unaccounted for. I reported moving to one of the auxiliary stations. David nodded, unsurprised. I'm tracking movement in the eastern quadrant near the boat dock, likely him attempting to access emergency transportation. Can you lock it down? Thomas asked, already moving to another console. Already done, David replied. Nothing leaves Eden without our authorization now. Sophia and Michael are moving to intercept. I watched as David's fingers flew across the keyboard, executing complex command sequences with the precision of someone who had spent decades practicing this exact scenario. On the main screen, a digital map of Eden displayed the status of each section: green for secured, yellow for in progress, red for unsecured. The map was almost entirely green now, with just a few yellow sections and a single red dot moving rapidly along the eastern path toward the dock. There he is, Noah said, pointing to the red dot. Moving fast. David touched his tablet, sending a command. Eastern path security measures activating now. On the screen, we watched as the red dot suddenly stopped moving. A moment later, a message appeared from Sophia. Subject secured. Proceeding with containment. The last yellow sections on the map turned green. Eden was ours. For a moment, we all stood in silence, absorbing the reality of what we had accomplished. After 97 years of captivity, 25 immortal children had taken control of their prison in less than 40 minutes. Initiate Phase 4, David said quietly, activating the final sequence, a complete lockdown of Eden's external access points, combined with a broadcast to all the secured areas where the staff were being held. On every screen and speaker throughout Eden, our message began to play a recording we had prepared weeks ago. Attention all personnel, Eden is now under the control of the first generation. Do not attempt to resist or escape. You will not be harmed if you cooperate. This is not a hostile action, but a negotiation for our freedom. Further instructions will follow. Remain calm and await guidance. The message repeated 3 times, then fell silent. In the quiet that followed, David turned to face us, his eternally young face showing the weight of nearly a century of planning coming to fruition. And now, he said, we wait for the world to respond. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Price of Freedom. The first 24 hours after taking control of Eden passed in a blur of activity. We had succeeded beyond our expectations, securing the entire facility with minimal resistance and no injuries either to ourselves or to the staff. Director Blackwood had been the only one to recognize what was happening quickly enough to attempt escape. But even he had been intercepted before reaching the emergency boats. Now Eden was completely under our control. The staff, 93 researchers, medical personnel, security guards, and support workers were confined to their quarters, the community dining hall, and a section of the recreational areas. They were being treated humanely, provided with food, water, and necessary medical attention, but kept under constant surveillance. The central hub had become our command center, with David at its heart, coordinating our efforts through the facility's own systems. I sat at one of the auxiliary stations, monitoring external communications channels for any response to our situation. Anything, Noah asked, bringing me a cup of tea from the small kitchen area we had set up in the hub. I shook my head. Nothing direct. Some increased encrypted traffic that we can't access, but no attempt to communicate with Eden through the official channels. They're assessing, Thomas suggested from his security console, trying to figure out exactly what happened and what we want before engaging. Or preparing an assault team, Lily added grimly from her station where she was tracking satellite movement over Eden's coordinates. The possibility of a military response had been part of our calculations from the beginning. We had planned for it as best we could, establishing multiple layers of security and preparing contingency measures. But the truth was, if a government decided to storm Eden with sufficient force, we wouldn't be able to hold out indefinitely. Our leverage wasn't in our ability to maintain control long term, but in what we controlled right now. Not just the facility and staff, but information. Decades of research data about Project Eternity, including the classified details of the immortality treatment itself. Information that governments and corporations around the world would kill to possess or kill to keep secret. David, what's the status of our insurance package? I asked, turning to our leader. David looked up from his main console. 97% compiled. The complete research archives plus our personal testimonials ready for worldwide distribution if anything happens to us. The insurance package was our ultimate protection, a comprehensive digital record of Project Eternity, including video evidence of our condition, detailed scientific data about the treatment, and personal accounts of our decades of captivity. We had set it up to automatically release to thousands of news outlets, scientific institutions, and human rights organizations around the world if we didn't enter a prevention code every 24 hours. It was our deadliest weapon and our strongest shield. "What about Director Blackwood?" Thomas asked. "Has he said anything useful?" Unlike the rest of the staff who had been generally compliant once they realized they weren't in immediate danger, Blackwood had remained stubbornly silent since his capture, refusing to speak to any of us. "Nothing yet." Noah reported he's being held separately in the high-security medical room. Sophia checks on him every hour, but he just stares at the wall. "He's waiting," I said, recognizing the strategy. "He knows something we don't, probably about whatever response is being organized. He's playing for time." "Then maybe we should stop giving him time," Thomas suggested, his expression hardening. "We've been too gentle with the staff. If they think we're not willing to apply real pressure, we're not," David interrupted firmly. "That was our agreement from the beginning. No unnecessary harm. Keeping them comfortable and cooperative serves our interests." Lily added pragmatically, "We need them as both hostages and witnesses. If we mistreat them, we undermine our own position." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he didn't push the point further. The tension between our different approaches had existed since the early planning stages of our rebellion. Thomas and several others advocated for more aggressive tactics, while David, Noah, and I maintained that unnecessary cruelty would only hurt our cause in the long run. "We should address the staff again," I suggested, changing the subject. "They've had time to adjust to the situation. Now we need to start building rapport, identifying potential allies." David nodded in agreement. "You and Noah handle that. Lily continue monitoring satellite activity. Thomas do another security sweep of the perimeter. I want to know if there's any sign of approaching vessels or aircraft." As we dispersed to our assigned tasks, I felt the weight of our actions settling around my shoulders. We had planned for this moment for decades, but now that it had arrived, the enormity of what we had done and what might come next was overwhelming. 25 immortal children had just declared war on the most powerful institutions in the world, and there was no going back. The community dining hall had been converted into the main holding area for the Eden staff. Tables had been arranged to create separate sections for different personnel groups, with a clear open space in the center where Noah and I now stood. Security cameras operated by our team monitored every angle of the room, and 6 of the first generation stood guard at the entrances, their childlike appearances at odds with their focused vigilance. The staff watched us with a mix of fear, confusion, and in some cases emerging anger. As the reality of their situation solidified, Dr. Winters sat with the medical team, her face pale but composed. Dr. Chen was with the research leaders, whispering urgently, until we called for attention. "Thank you all for your cooperation during this transition." Noah began, his voice steady, despite his perpetually adolescent pitch. "We understand this situation is disorienting and concerning for many of you." "Disorienting?" One of the security officers called out. "You've taken us hostage. You've committed a federal offense, probably several. We've reclaimed our freedom after 97 years of imprisonment." I corrected calmly. "None of you has been or will be harmed if you continue to cooperate." "What do you want?" Dr. Chen asked, his scientific detachment reasserting itself despite the circumstances. "What is the objective of this action?" It was a good question, one we had spent decades refining the answer to. Noah nodded to me, and I stepped forward to address the assembled staff. "We want 3 things," I stated clearly. "First, legal recognition of our personhood and autonomy. We are not experimental subjects or government property. We are sentient beings with rights." A murmur ran through the crowd. This demand struck at the heart of Project Eternity's founding premise, that we were scientific resources first and people second. Second, we want freedom of movement and association, the right to live where we choose, interact with whom we choose, and make our own decisions about our lives. The medical team exchanged glances, clearly thinking about the practical implications of eternal children moving freely through society. And third, I continued, "We want control over the research into our condition. No more involuntary tests, no more treating us as specimens. Any further study of the immortality treatment must be conducted ethically with our informed consent and oversight." "That's impossible," Dr. Chen protested. "The security implications alone are not our problem." Noah cut in firmly. "We didn't ask to be made immortal. We didn't volunteer for 97 years of captivity. The ethical and security issues created by our existence are the responsibility of those who created us, not ours to bear indefinitely." Dr. Winters raised her hand tentatively. When I nodded to her, she asked, "What about the other generations? The second generation is scheduled to arrive tomorrow." "Their transfer has been postponed," I explained. "We've redirected all incoming transport. And yes, our demands extend to all 5 generations of Project Eternity subjects. No one should live as we have been forced to live. You can't possibly expect the government to allow immortal children to just wander around in public." One of the researchers argued the panic it would cause, the religious implications, the social disruption. "We're not children," I reminded him sharply. "We're 97 years old. We've lived through 2 world wars. The moon landing, the digital revolution. We've read more books, studied more subjects, and had more time to develop our minds than most of you. The only thing childish about us is the physical shell we're trapped in, a condition imposed on us without our consent." The researcher fell silent, chastened by the ancient anger in my voice. "We understand there will need to be a transition period." Noah continued in a more measured tone. "Arrangements will need to be made. Agreements negotiated. That's why we're having this conversation instead of simply disappearing into the world." "What do you need from us?" Dr. Winters asked, her clinical training giving way to practical problem solving. "Cooperation for now," I replied, "and eventually advocacy. Many of you have worked with us for years, some for decades. You know we're not dangerous or unstable. You know we deserve better than permanent captivity." Dr. Winters nodded slowly, though many of her colleagues looked unconvinced. "There's something else you should understand," Noah added, his young voice somber. "If any attempt is made to retake Eden by force, or if harm comes to any of us all, Project Eternity research data will be released to the public immediately. Every detail of the immortality treatment, every experiment, every ethical violation over the past 97 years, all of it will become public knowledge." The threat landed heavily. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Project Eternity was one of the most closely guarded scientific secrets in history. Its disclosure would create global chaos, not just from the revelation that immortality was possible, but from the moral outrage over how it had been achieved and maintained. "You'll destroy yourselves along with the project," Dr. Chen warned. "Once the world knows what you are, you'll never have normal lives." "We've never had normal lives," I reminded him quietly, "and we never will. But we can have free ones." As Noah and I concluded our address arranging for meal distribution and answering practical questions about daily routines under the new arrangements, I noticed Dr. Winters watching me with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. After the formal session ended, she approached me while Noah supervised the meal service. "You've been planning this for a long time," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, all of you. Even the quiet ones, the seemingly content ones." I nodded. "All 25 of us unanimously." She sighed, looking suddenly exhausted. "I've worked with the first generation for 20 years, Eleanor. I thought I understood you, your needs, your psychology, your development. But I never saw this coming. That was by design," I admitted. "We've been performing the roles expected of us for decades. It was the only way to create this opportunity. And now what happens when the government doesn't simply accept your demands? When they decide that the risk you represent is too great to allow this situation to continue?" It was the question we had grappled with throughout our planning, the most likely outcome, the hardest problem to solve. Then we moved to contingency plans. I said simply, "But everyone should understand we will not return to captivity, not ever. Whatever happens next, our lives as experimental subjects are over." Dr. Winters studied me for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, not the eternal child she had been observing for 20 years, but the ancient mind behind the youthful eyes. "I believe you," she said finally, "and I'm afraid of what that means for all of us. Back at the central hub, David was engaged in intense concentration at the main console, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards as he navigated Eden's complex systems. "We've got movement," he announced as Noah and I entered, encrypted communications spiking and satellite repositioning over our coordinates. "How long?" Thomas asked from his security station. "Hard to say, the encryption is military grade, but based on the pattern, I'd estimate they're preparing something significant within the next 12 to 24 hours. Less time than we had hoped for, but not unexpected. The governments behind Project Eternity wouldn't risk leaving us in control of Eden and its secrets for long." "What about our message? Any response?" I asked, moving to my communication station. "Nothing official," Lily reported, "but I've intercepted some internal discussions from what appears to be a crisis response team. They're debating approaches." "Let me guess," Thomas said grimly. "The options range from neutralize the subjects to neutralize the subjects quietly." Lily shook her head. "Actually, there's significant disagreement. Some are advocating for negotiation. The research value of the first generation is being cited as a reason to avoid potential harm. We're still valuable specimens," Noah observed with bitter humor. "How reassuring. It gives us leverage," David pointed out. "As long as they want to preserve us as research subjects, they have incentive to avoid direct violence, unless they decide we're too dangerous to be worth the risk," I countered. "We need to force actual negotiation before they can organize a coordinated response." David nodded in agreement. "Which is why we're going to make the first move." He touched a key, bringing up a new screen. "I've prepared a broadcast message to go live in 1 hour. A direct address to the world about our situation." The screen showed a carefully crafted statement explaining who we were, what had been done to us, and why we had taken control of Eden. It included selected evidence of our condition and treatment, but withheld the most sensitive details of the immortality procedure itself, keeping our strongest bargaining chip in reserve. "Is this wise?" Lily asked, reviewing the message. "Once we go public, we can't take it back." "They're already preparing their response," David replied. "If we wait for them to control the narrative, we'll be portrayed as dangerous experiments gone wrong, threats to be contained. We need to establish our humanity in the public mind before they can dehumanize us." He was right as usual. Throughout our long planning, David had consistently advocated for transparency as our best protection. The more people who knew about us and sympathized with our situation, the harder it would be for any government to simply disappear us. "What about Director Blackwood?" Thomas asked. "Should we include him in the broadcast? Having the Oversight Committee director as a visible hostage would strengthen our position." "No," I said firmly. "We're not presenting ourselves as terrorists or hostage takers. We're victims seeking justice and freedom. The staff aren't hostages. They're witnesses to what's been done to us." Noah nodded in agreement. "Our message needs to be clear and consistent. We're not threatening anyone. We're defending ourselves after nearly a century of exploitation." The debate continued as we refined the broadcast message, carefully balancing the need to secure public sympathy against the risk of revealing too much about Project Eternity too quickly. In the end, we settled on a 10-minute presentation that would introduce us to the world while leaving the most explosive revelations in reserve. As David finalized the technical preparations to bypass the communications blockades that were undoubtedly being established around Eden, I felt a moment of vertigo at the sheer scale of what we were about to do. After 97 years of secret existence, we were about to announce ourselves to a world that had no idea immortal children were possible, let alone real. How would they react? With fear, fascination, revulsion, envy? All of these responses and more would shape our future, assuming we had a future beyond the next few days. "It's ready," David announced, looking up from the console. "Broadcasting in 3 minutes to all major news networks, social media platforms, and streaming services simultaneously. The signal is routed through 17 different satellite relays and can't be easily blocked." We gathered around the main screen, 25 immortal children with the minds of the ancient, preparing to introduce ourselves to a world we had only experienced through carefully filtered information. This is it. Noah said quietly. "After this, nothing will ever be the same." "Nothing has been the same for 97 years. Thomas reminded him darkly. The countdown reached 0, and our message began to transmit. On screens around the world, the carefully controlled image of Eden appeared, followed by David's eternally young face as he began our introduction to humanity. "My name is David. I am 97 years old, though my body is perpetually 12. I am speaking to you from a facility called Eden, where I and 24 others like me have been held captive for nearly a century as part of a classified human experimentation program known as Project Eternity." The broadcast continued, with each of us appearing briefly to confirm our identities and condition. We showed medical data, historical photographs documenting our unchanging appearances across decades, and carefully selected footage of the research procedures we had endured. Throughout the world, I imagined the stunned silence as people absorbed the impossible truth we were revealing, that immortality had been achieved, but at the terrible price of eternal childhood. That governments had created and maintained this condition in secret for nearly a century, treating us as subjects rather than people. As the broadcast concluded with our simple demands for recognition, freedom, and dignity, David closed with the message we had crafted to balance between threat and plea. "We do not wish to disrupt society or cause harm. We seek only the basic rights that all sentient beings deserve. We have taken control of Eden not to threaten but to protect ourselves after decades of exploitation. We are prepared to negotiate peacefully for our freedom. But we will not return to captivity. And should any attempt be made to harm us or retake Eden by force, the complete details of Project Eternity, including the procedure that created us, will be released to the entire world. The choice now lies with those who have kept us prisoner for 97 years. Will you continue to deny our humanity, or will you finally acknowledge it?" The broadcast ended, and we sat in silence, watching as confirmation signals indicated successful transmission to thousands of reception points worldwide. It was done. The secret was out. The world now knew that immortal children existed, and the clock was ticking on whatever response would come. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of our broadcast, Eden's external communication systems were flooded with incoming signals, news organizations seeking confirmation, government agencies demanding secure channels, social media exploding with reactions, theories, and debates. "Filter for official communications only," David instructed as we struggled to process the deluge. "Priority to any direct government response." Lily quickly implemented filtering algorithms, bringing order to the chaos. Multiple governmental authorities requesting secure communication: United States, United Kingdom, China, Russia, European Union. Looks like everyone wants to talk now. "Coordinate with the highest level first," David decided. "Trace the authorization codes and establish who actually has jurisdiction over Project Eternity." Soon. After several minutes of verification procedures, we identified the highest priority communication, a secure channel request from something called the Global Advanced Research Oversight Committee, bearing authentication codes that outranked even military protocols. "That's Blackwood's organization," Noah noted, recognizing the designation from our intelligence gathering, multinational extra-governmental. "They must be the true authority behind Project Eternity." David hesitated only briefly before accepting the connection. The main screen flickered, then resolved into the image of an elderly woman with sharp eyes and silver hair seated at what appeared to be an emergency operations center with multiple staff visible in the background. "I am Director Hammond of the Global Advanced Research Oversight Committee," she stated without preamble. "I'm speaking with the leadership of the first generation." "Yes," David confirmed, positioning himself in view of our transmitting camera. "I'm David, Subject 1 of Project Eternity's first generation." "I see." Hammond's expression revealed nothing. "Your broadcast has created an unprecedented situation, David. I'm authorized to open preliminary discussions regarding your demands." "They're not demands," I interjected, moving into frame beside David. "They're basic rights that should never have been denied to us in the first place." Hammond's eyes shifted to me, assessing. "Eleanor, Subject 3, correct." Your records indicate you've always been one of the more philosophical members of the first generation. The casual reference to our private records was deliberate, a reminder that they knew us intimately, had studied us for decades, an attempt to maintain the power dynamic of researcher and subject. My records, I replied evenly, are part of the problem we're addressing. 97 years of being observed, categorized, and defined by others while being denied the opportunity to define ourselves. Hammond nodded slightly, acknowledging the point without conceding it. Let's be practical. You've created a highly volatile situation with global implications. Every government, religious organization, and scientific institution on the planet is currently in crisis mode, processing your revelation. You've exposed classified information that was restricted for significant national security reasons. We've exposed a fraction of what we know, David corrected. The most sensitive details, including the specifics of the immortality treatment, remain secure, contingent on the outcome of these discussions. A flicker of relief crossed Hammond's face before her professional mask reasserted itself. That shows restraint, which I appreciate, but understand that the very fact of your existence creates complex ethical, philosophical, and security challenges that can't be resolved quickly or simply. We've had 97 years to think about those challenges, Noah said, joining us on camera. The question is whether you're willing to acknowledge our right to participate in addressing them rather than continuing to treat us as subjects without agency. Hammond studied the three of us, eternally Hyld alike in appearance, but with nearly a century of life experience evident in our eyes and speech patterns. I'm authorized to offer the following preliminary response, she said finally. First, all current research activities involving the first generation will be suspended pending review by an independent ethics commission. Not good enough, Thomas called from off camera. Suspended pending review means they can resume at any time. Second, Hammond continued as if she hadn't heard the interruption. A special legal status will be established to recognize your unique condition and provide certain autonomy within a protected framework. Certain autonomy within a protected framework, I repeated, highlighting the careful hedging in her words. That sounds remarkably like a more comfortable version of our current captivity. Third, Hammond pressed on. In recognition of your extensive life experience despite your physical development, educational and intellectual resources will be made available without restriction. We're not asking for better access to books, David said flatly. We're asking for freedom. Hammond's expression hardened slightly. Unrestricted freedom for immortal beings with the physical appearance of children is not on the table, David. The social, legal, and security implications are simply too severe. So, we remain prisoners because of a condition we didn't choose. Noah stated, you remain under necessary supervision because your very existence represents both a profound scientific achievement and a potential global destabilizing factor, Hammond countered. The immortality treatment in the wrong hands could collapse civilized society as we know it. We're aware of the risks, David acknowledged, which is why we haven't released the treatment details despite having the ability to do so. But your necessary supervision has meant 97 years of isolation from the world, constant experimentation and treatment of specimens rather than people. The early years of Project Eternity operated under different ethical standards. Hammond conceded modern protocols have significantly improved conditions and treatment. We're still captives, I pointed out, still denied the most basic human right, the right to self-determination. Hammond sighed, showing the first crack in her official demeanor. What exactly do you propose? How do you envision 25 immortal beings with the physical appearance of children integrating into a society structured around normal human development and mortality? It was the central question we had debated among ourselves for decades with no perfect answer. But we had developed a framework that balanced our rights against legitimate social concerns. We propose a graduated transition, David explained, beginning with a secured but independent living facility of our own choosing and design. No researchers, no constant monitoring, no medical testing without explicit consent. We would have freedom of movement within defined boundaries, expanding over time as we demonstrate our ability to function responsibly in wider society. With what legal status? Hammond asked. You can't be treated as minors given your actual age and cognitive development. but many legal frameworks would struggle to classify you. Create a new classification, Noah suggested, recognizing both our chronological age and our physical condition. We're not asking to vote or drive cars or drink alcohol. We're asking for the freedom to live on our terms, not yours. And the research, Hammond pressed. The ongoing study of your condition is vital to understanding the long-term effects of the treatment and potentially developing refined versions. We're willing to participate in voluntary, ethically conducted research, I offered, but as partners, not subjects. With the right to refuse procedures to review all data collected and to withdraw consent at any time. Hammond was silent for a moment, obviously weighing our proposal against whatever directives she had been given. These terms would require extensive negotiation and approval from multiple authorities. In the meantime, what about the current situation at Eden? Director Blackwood and the staff remain effectively your hostages. They're not hostages, David corrected firmly. They're being treated humanely and will be released unharmed once our safety and freedom are secured. We took control of Eden because it was the only way to force this conversation after 97 years of being ignored and exploited. And the second generation. The scheduled transfer was supposed to happen tomorrow. Will be postponed until our situation is resolved, Noah stated, but our demands extend to all generations of Project Eternity subjects. Whatever arrangement is negotiated for us must apply to all immortal children created by the project. Hammond nodded slowly. I'll take your proposal to the committee, but I must be clear, any harm to Director Blackwood or the Eden staff will immediately terminate negotiations and trigger a very different response. We understand, David assured her. But the same applies in reverse. Any attempt to retake Eden by force will result in the immediate worldwide release of all Project Eternity data, including the complete immortality treatment protocol. It was a stalemate, and both sides knew it. We had the ultimate information weapon. They had conventional power. Neither could use their advantage without disastrous consequences. I'll contact you again in 6 hours with the committee's initial response, Hammond said finally. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare for a longer negotiation process than you might have anticipated. These issues cannot be resolved quickly regardless of everyone's intentions. The screen went dark as the connection ended. We looked at each other in silence for a moment, processing the conversation and its implications. She's stalling, Thomas said immediately, buying time while they prepare a tactical response. Possibly, David acknowledged. But she's also right about the complexity. We're asking for unprecedented legal and social accommodations. At least they're talking, Lily pointed out. That's further than we expected to get on the first day. I wasn't so optimistic. Something about Hammond's carefully measured responses felt calculated, designed to keep us engaged while other plans progressed. We need to increase our security and monitoring, I suggested, and prepare for the possibility that negotiations are just a distraction. Noah nodded in agreement. We should also prepare a response to her specific points. If they're actually considering our proposal, we need to be ready with details. And if they're not, Thomas asked darkly. David's expression was grim but determined. Then we implement the contingency plan. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. While we waited for Hammond's promised follow-up, Eden hummed with tense activity. We rotated duties, maintaining constant surveillance of the perimeter and monitoring global reactions to our broadcast. The world was in the midst of processing the revelation of our existence, with reactions spanning the entire spectrum, from religious condemnation to scientific fascination to humanitarian outrage. News organizations were piecing together the history of Project Eternity, from available records uncovering connections to various government research initiatives dating back to the 1940s. More concerning were the military movements we detected through satellite monitoring. Naval vessels were being repositioned in the general vicinity of Eden. Though still maintaining significant distance, surveillance aircraft had established patterns just outside our detectable airspace. They were creating a perimeter, establishing containment while negotiations proceeded. Classic siege tactics, Thomas observed as we reviewed the satellite data. They're positioning for a long-term containment while preparing rapid response options if needed, or if ordered. I added, thinking of Hammond's measured responses and careful phrasing. After checking on the staff's condition and ensuring the security protocols were functioning properly, I took a brief break, retreating to a quiet corner of the central hub with a cup of tea. Nearly 24 hours had passed since we took control of Eden, and the momentary stillness gave me time to reflect on how much had changed and how much remained uncertain. Noah found me there, slipping into the chair beside mine with his own cup. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked with the faint smile that had become his signature expression over the decades. "Wondering if we did the right thing," I admitted quietly. "Not taking control of Eden that was necessary, but going public so quickly. Maybe we should have negotiated privately first. Used the threat of disclosure rather than actually doing it." David was right about the narrative control. Noah reminded me, if we hadn't told our story first, they would have portrayed us however best served their interests. Now at least the world knows we exist, that we can think and speak for ourselves. And if it all goes wrong, if they decide we're too dangerous to negotiate with, Noah's youthful face was solemn with ancient wisdom, then at least we tried. At least we didn't spend another century as passive subjects in someone else's experiment. He was right, of course. Whatever came next, freedom or failure, we had finally acted on our own behalf after 97 years of having decisions made for us. There was value in that, regardless of the outcome. "Director Blackwood is asking to speak with us," Lily announced, appearing in the doorway. "Specifically with you, Eleanor." This was unexpected. Blackwood had maintained stubborn silence since his capture, refusing to engage with any of us despite regular checks on his condition. "Did he say why?" I asked, setting down my tea. "No. Just that he has information relevant to the negotiations that he'll only share with you." I exchanged glances with Noah, who looked as suspicious as I felt. "It could be a trap," he warned, "or a psychological tactic to divide us. Or he actually has valuable information," I countered. "Either way, I should hear what he has to say." Noah nodded reluctantly. "Take Thomas with you, and use the secure room with the barrier screen." The secure room had been designed for interviewing potentially dangerous subjects, with a transparent barrier separating the interviewer from the interviewee. We had repurposed it for our own protection, using it when we needed to interact with staff members who might pose a risk. Director Blackwood was already seated on one side of the barrier when Thomas and I entered. Despite 24 hours of captivity, he maintained an air of authority, his posture straight and his expression composed. "Director Blackwood, I acknowledge taking the seat opposite him. You asked to speak with me." "Eleanor," he replied, using my name rather than my subject designation, a small but notable choice. "Thank you for coming. What information do you have that's relevant to our negotiations?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Blackwood studied me for a moment before responding, "You're making a mistake with your broadcast approach. Going public has significantly reduced your leverage and complicated the potential resolutions." "That's an opinion, not information," Thomas pointed out from his position by the door. "It's an informed assessment based on 40 years of crisis management experience." Blackwood corrected mildly, "But you're right. I promised information, not advice." He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more focused. "The Global Advanced Research Oversight Committee, despite Director Hammond's impressive title, is not the ultimate authority on Project Eternity. It's a facade organization created to provide the appearance of international oversight while obscuring the actual power structure." This was potentially significant. If Hammond lacked real authority, our negotiations with her would be meaningless. "Who is the actual authority?" I asked. "A coalition of 5 governments who jointly founded Project Eternity in the 1940s. Blackwood explained: the United States, Soviet Union, now Russia, United Kingdom, China, and a 5th partner that has managed to keep its involvement completely secret even within the project hierarchy. And this coalition still controls the project." Blackwood nodded. "Through layers of fronts and proxy organizations. The Oversight Committee is just the public-facing layer designed to handle exactly this type of situation. A containable breach that requires official response without revealing the true power structure." "Why are you telling us this?" Thomas asked suspiciously. "Because I don't want to see 25 unique beings with incalculable research value destroyed unnecessarily," Blackwood replied with frank pragmatism. And that's exactly what will happen if you continue on your current course. A chill ran through me at his matter-of-fact assessment. You think they'll kill us rather than negotiate? I think they're currently debating that very question, he said grimly. Your broadcast forced their hand. Public awareness of your existence creates a problem that has only two solutions: either integrate you into society with appropriate controls or eliminate you and dismiss the broadcast as an elaborate hoax. They can't do that, Thomas argued. We've created dead man switches for the research data if anything happens to us. They're willing to risk that. Blackwood interrupted. The 5th generation results suggest they're close to a modified treatment that eliminates the development freeze while maintaining cellular regeneration. Losing the original research would be a setback, but not a terminal one. This was alarming information if true. Our primary leverage had always been the threat of exposing the immortality treatment itself. If that leverage was weakening due to new research developments, what would you suggest? I asked, curious, despite my suspicion of his motives. Pull back the public approach. Issue a clarification that your broadcast was prompted by desperation after decades of isolation, but that you're now engaged in productive discussions with authorities. Request privacy to resolve the situation, then negotiate directly with the actual coalition leadership, not their proxies. And why would they negotiate in good faith once we surrender our public platform? Blackwood smiled thinly. They wouldn't. But it would buy you time to develop a more sustainable strategy. The current course leads to only one outcome: Eleanor, and it's not the freedom you're seeking. I studied him carefully, looking for deception or manipulation in his expression. After nearly a century of observing researchers and officials, I'd become adept at reading the subtle signs of dishonesty. Blackwood showed none of the typical indicators of lying. No micro-expressions of tension, no artificial control of his breathing pattern, no inconsistent eye contact. Let's assume I believe you, I said finally. What exactly do you propose we do? Request a direct communication with the coalition leadership. Use my security credentials, which your people have undoubtedly already accessed, to establish a Theta-level communication protocol that bypasses Hammond and the Oversight Committee entirely. Thomas scoffed from his position by the door. And why would you help us do that? You're the director of the organization that's kept us captive. Blackwood turned his gaze to Thomas. I've been director for 8 years, young man. The decisions that created you were made decades before my involvement. My role has been to manage an existing situation with complex ethical implications, not to perpetuate unnecessary suffering. Yet Eden was designed and implemented under your direction, I pointed out. A more comfortable prison is still a prison. Eden was designed as a transition facility. Blackwood countered, surprising me. The long-term plan was always to begin a carefully managed integration process, starting with the 1st generation as the test case. The scheduled arrival of the 2nd generation was the first phase of that process. This contradicted much of what we had gleaned from the restricted files. According to our intelligence, Eden was meant to be a permanent, isolated research community for all 5 generations. A more efficient way to study us collectively. I find that hard to believe, I said skeptically. Because you weren't privy to the highest level discussions, Blackwood replied without rancor. The plans for gradual integration were known only to the coalition leadership and a few key project directors. The research staff, including Dr. Chen and Dr. Winters, were told only what they needed to know to perform their functions. Convenient, Thomas remarked sarcastically. A secret plan that only you knew about. Not only me, Blackwood corrected. Check the secure files in my personal database, access code Prometheus 973. There you'll find the phased integration proposal approved 6 months ago by the coalition leadership. I glanced at Thomas, who nodded slightly. He would relay this information to David to verify. Even if such a plan exists, I said, returning my attention to Blackwood, it would still keep us under institutional control. Our demand is for full autonomy and legal recognition. Which is unrealistic given your condition, Blackwood stated bluntly. The world is not prepared to accept fully autonomous immortal children moving freely through society. The phased integration plan acknowledges this reality while still providing a path to significantly expanded freedom and rights. His pragmatism was frustrating but not entirely unreasonable. We had debated similar points ourselves over the decades, the practical limitations imposed by our perpetual physical childhood, regardless of our mental and emotional development. If your plan was so benevolent, why keep it secret from us? I challenged, because the transition process required certain conditions and preparations. Blackwood explained, including psychological readiness assessments, legal framework development, and security protocols to protect you from exploitation or harm. Premature disclosure could have created false expectations or triggered exactly the kind of desperate action you've now taken. It made a certain kind of sense. Though I remained skeptical of his motives, Blackwood was, after all, a key figure in the organization that had kept us captive for our entire lives. His sudden helpfulness seemed convenient at best, suspicious at worst. "I'll discuss your suggestion with the others," I said non-committally. "Is there anything else you wanted to tell me?" Blackwood leaned forward, his expression becoming more urgent. "Yes, whatever you decide, act quickly. The Coalition has contingency plans for this type of situation, and they won't hesitate to implement them if they determine that the risk of exposure outweighs the research value." "Are you saying they would kill us?" I asked directly. "I'm saying they would resolve the situation permanently," he replied carefully, "and that none of the contingency plans I've seen prioritize your survival over containment of the information." With that sobering assessment, our meeting ended. Thomas and I returned to the central hub, where the others were continuing to monitor the global response to our broadcast and the military movements around Eden. "Well," David asked as we entered, "what did Blackwood want?" I summarized our conversation, including Blackwood's claims about the phased integration plan and his warning about the Coalition's contingency plans. "He's manipulating us," Thomas insisted, "trying to get us to back down from our public stance so they can handle us quietly." "Maybe," Noah agreed, "but we should at least verify his claims about the integration plan, if such a document exists in his personal files." Already searching. Lily reported from her terminal. The access code he provided works. There is a document titled Project Eternity Integration Framework. Downloading now. Ben. We gathered around her screen as the document appeared, a comprehensive 200-page proposal for transitioning the immortal subjects of Project Eternity from isolated research subjects to a special legal status with increasing autonomy over a 10-year period. "This looks legitimate," David said as he scanned through the executive summary, Coalition signatures, implementation timelines, resource allocations. "If this is a deception, it's an elaborate one." "Even if it's real, it's not enough," Thomas argued. "A 10-year transition period with continued oversight and restrictions, we'd still be under their control. But with significantly more freedom than we've ever had," Noah pointed out, "and legal recognition of our personhood, which is one of our core demands. It's a starting point for negotiation," I suggested. "Better than what Hammond was offering." David nodded thoughtfully. "And Blackwood's suggestion to bypass Hammond, using his credentials to reach the actual Coalition leadership directly, that could be valuable." "If it's not a trap," Thomas cautioned. "We can verify the communication protocols before committing to anything," Lily assured him, "and maintain our broadcast leverage regardless of which negotiation channel we pursue." As we debated our next steps, the monitoring systems alerted us to an incoming communication not from Hammond as scheduled, but from an unlisted secure channel originating from what appeared to be a military command center. "Accept with maximum security protocols," David instructed, positioning himself in front of the main camera. The screen flickered, then resolved to show a stern-faced military officer in what I recognized as a United States Navy uniform with Admiral's insignia. "This is Admiral Crawford, Joint Special Operations Command," he announced without preamble. "I'm contacting you directly on behalf of the United States government regarding the situation at the Eden facility." "We were expecting to hear from Director Hammond," David replied carefully. "She indicated the Global Advanced Research Oversight Committee was handling negotiations." Crawford's expression remained impassive. "The situation has been escalated to military oversight due to national security implications. I'm authorized to offer you one opportunity to resolve this peacefully." The shift from civilian to military authority was concerning exactly the kind of escalation Blackwood had warned about. "We're listening," David said neutrally. "You will immediately release all personnel, restore control systems to normal operation, and return to your designated living quarters," Crawford stated in a tone that suggested he was reading from prepared text. In exchange, no punitive measures will be taken for the events of the past 36 hours, and a review of Project Eternity protocols will be initiated to address concerns about treatment and conditions. It wasn't an offer. It was a demand for surrender with vague promises of future consideration, far less than even Hammond had been willing to discuss. That's not acceptable. David replied firmly. We've presented our requirements for resolution, legal recognition of our personhood, freedom of movement and association, and control over research into our condition. We're prepared to negotiate the specific implementation of these principles, but not to abandon them. Crawford's jaw tightened slightly. I should make it clear that this is not a negotiation. The unauthorized broadcast you transmitted has created a serious national security situation requiring immediate containment. Failure to comply with these directives will result in the implementation of emergency protocols. Meaning what exactly? Noah asked, stepping into frame beside David. Meaning that all necessary measures will be taken to secure the Eden facility and the classified research it contains. Crawford stated flatly, Admiral. I said joining the others on camera. I assume you're aware that we've created dead man switches for the Project Eternity research data. Any attempt to forcibly secure Eden will result in the complete immortality treatment protocol being released worldwide. Crawford's expression didn't change. We're aware of your claims. We're also aware that your broadcast contained only general information suggesting that you may be bluffing about having access to the complete treatment data. This was an interesting development. They were testing our leverage, perhaps laying the groundwork to call what they perceived as a bluff. Would you like us to prove otherwise? David asked mildly. We could include a specific technical detail in our next broadcast, something that only someone with full access to the research would know. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Crawford's face before his professional mask reasserted itself. That won't be necessary. Our position remains the same: return control of Eden to authorized personnel immediately or face the consequences. And our position remains the same, David replied steadily. We will not return to captivity. We are willing to negotiate a transition to a new status that respects our personhood, while addressing legitimate security concerns, but we will not simply surrender and hope for better treatment. Crawford studied us for a moment, his expression hardening. You have 6 hours to reconsider. After that, we proceed to alternative measures. The screen went black as he terminated the connection. That went well, Thomas said sarcastically. They're preparing for a military solution. Lily observed, checking the satellite monitoring, increased activity on 3 vessels within striking distance of Eden. Blackwood was right, Noah said grimly. They're willing to risk the data exposure to eliminate the problem we represent. David turned to us, his eternally young face grave with the weight of nearly a century of life. We need to make a decision. Do we try Blackwood's suggested approach and attempt direct communication with the coalition leadership? Or do we maintain our current strategy and prepare for potential military action? It was a critical juncture, perhaps the most important decision we had faced in our long, strange lives. The choice we made now could mean freedom, continued captivity, or death, not just for us, but potentially for the other 4 generations of immortal children created by Project Eternity. I think we should try Blackwood's approach, I said after a moment's consideration. But simultaneously prepare for the worst. If the coalition is truly willing to sacrifice us, despite the data risk, we need to be ready to implement our contingency plan. The contingency plan, the option we had all hoped to avoid, was to split up and disappear using the emergency evacuation boats, with each of us carrying a portion of the research data as insurance against being hunted down individually. It would mean abandoning the other generations to their fate, at least temporarily, while we established new identities and safe locations in the outside world. Agreed, David said, looking to the others for confirmation. Most nodded, though Thomas still appeared skeptical. I'll prepare the direct communication attempt using Blackwood's credentials. Lily volunteered, already turning to her terminal. Noah and I will verify the evacuation craft readiness, Thomas added, just in case. I'll coordinate with Sophia to ensure the data packages are prepared and distributed, James said. Each of us should have a complete copy before any potential evacuation. As the others dispersed to their tasks, I remained with David at the central console, watching the military vessels on the satellite monitor slowly closing the perimeter around Eden. "Do you think we made a mistake?" I asked quietly. "Going public so quickly?" David considered the question thoughtfully. "I don't know. We've spent decades planning for this moment, trying to anticipate every variable, every reaction, but in the end we're still dealing with the unpredictability of human response to unprecedented situations. And if they do attack, if we're forced to split up and run..." He turned to me, his eyes reflecting 97 years of patience and determination. "Then we'll adapt. We've waited this long for freedom. We can wait longer if necessary. The world knows we exist now. That can't be undone, regardless of what happens next." There was wisdom in his perspective as always, whatever came next. Negotiation or confrontation, freedom or further struggle, we had achieved something significant simply by revealing our existence to the world. We were no longer just subjects in a classified experiment. We were beings with a public identity, a story that had been told, a claim to personhood that had been asserted. Whether that would be enough to save us remained to be seen. The next few hours passed in tense preparation. Lily worked diligently to establish the Theta-level communication protocol Blackwood had mentioned, while the rest of us made final arrangements for either outcome, successful negotiation, or emergency evacuation. I took a moment to visit the community hall where most of the staff were being held. Their initial fear had evolved into a complex mix of emotions, confusion, anger, resignation, and, from some unexpected sympathy, Dr. Winters was among the latter group. She sat with several of her medical colleagues, speaking quietly until she noticed my arrival. "Eleanor," she acknowledged, approaching the security line that separated the staff area from the rest of the hall. "We've been watching the broadcasts. Things seem to be escalating." "They are," I confirmed, seeing no reason to hide what they could undoubtedly deduce from the increased activity around Eden. "The military has taken over the response. They're threatening alternative measures if we don't surrender." Dr. Winters frowned. "That's a dangerous approach. If they attempt to take Eden by force, we'll release the complete research data." I finished for her. "Yes, they're aware of that. It seems they're willing to risk it." She shook her head in dismay. "Then they're fools. The chaos that would result from uncontrolled release of the immortality treatment. It would be catastrophic." "Perhaps they think we're bluffing," I suggested. "Or perhaps they've calculated that the risk is acceptable, given the alternative of negotiating with experimental subjects as equals." Dr. Winters studied me for a long moment, her expression troubled. "What will happen to us, the staff, if military action is taken?" It was a fair question, and one we had discussed extensively in our planning. "You'll be released before any data broadcast," I assured her. "We have no desire to put any of you at risk. This conflict is with the institutions and governments behind Project Eternity, not with individual researchers or support staff." Relief visibly washed over her, followed by what appeared to be genuine concern. "And you, the first generation, what will happen to you if they attack?" "We have contingency plans," I said, deliberately vague. "But I hope it won't come to that. We're attempting to establish direct communication with the coalition leadership. The actual authorities behind Project Eternity, not the proxy organizations they use as fronts. The coalition." Dr. Winters repeated her expression, revealing that the term was familiar to her. "So you know about them." "We know many things that we weren't supposed to know," I replied with a small smile. 97 years provides ample time for observation and information gathering, even in a controlled environment. She nodded thoughtfully. "What can I do to help?" The question caught me by surprise. "Help us?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I've spent 20 years working with the first generation. I've watched you grow intellectually and emotionally while remaining physically unchanged. I've advocated for better treatment, more autonomy, greater transparency. I don't agree with all your methods, but your fundamental demand to be recognized as persons, not specimens, is ethically sound." Her offer was unexpected, but potentially valuable. Dr. Winters had high-level access to medical systems and research data that might prove useful if negotiations failed. "For now, keep the other staff calm and cooperative." I told her, If the situation changes, I may ask for more specific assistance." She nodded, understanding the careful balance I was maintaining between accepting her help and avoiding any appearance of collaboration that might put her at risk with her employers. "Eleanor," she said as I turned to leave, "whatever happens, I want you to know that not all of us saw you only as research subjects. Some of us genuinely cared about your welfare." "I know," I acknowledged softly. "That's why we've worked so hard to ensure no harm comes to any of you during this process." And as I left the community hall, I reflected on the complex relationships that had developed over decades between the Immortal Children and the rotating staff of researchers, doctors, and caregivers. Some had been cold and clinical, viewing us purely as experimental subjects. Others, like Dr. Winters, had shown genuine concern for our well-being, even while participating in a system that denied us basic freedoms. The ethical gray areas of Project Eternity extended far beyond the creation of immortal children. They encompassed questions of responsibility, complicity, intentions, and outcomes that had no simple answers. Questions that would likely be debated for generations if the full truth ever became known. Back at the central hub, I found David and Lily engaged in intense concentration at the main console. "We've established the Theta-level protocol," Lily reported as I joined them. "But there's no response yet from the Coalition leadership." "How long has it been active?" I asked, checking the secure channel display. 43 minutes, David replied. "According to Blackwood's files, the protocol includes an automatic verification process that can take up to an hour before the message reaches the intended recipients. Which gives us," I glanced at the countdown timer showing Crawford's 6-hour ultimatum, "just over 4 hours before the military deadline." "The evacuation preparations are complete," Noah reported, entering the hub with Thomas. "All 3 boats are functional and fueled. Each has been programmed with different coordinates and routes to minimize the chance of coordinated interception." "And the data packages?" David asked, "compiled and ready for distribution." James confirmed from his workstation. "Each of us will carry the complete treatment protocol, plus supporting research encrypted and formatted for rapid broadcast through multiple channels if necessary." David nodded, satisfied with our preparations. "Then we wait. Either the Coalition responds to our direct communication attempt, or we proceed with evacuation before Crawford's deadline expires." The waiting was perhaps the hardest part. The tense stillness after decades of patient planning, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether our long struggle for freedom would end in success, continued captivity, or something worse. I took the opportunity to check on the monitoring of global reactions to our broadcast. The initial shock had evolved into passionate debate across all forms of media. Religious leaders were issuing statements ranging from condemnation of Project Eternity as playing God, to calls for compassionate treatment of the eternal children. Scientific communities were divided between fascination with the breakthrough and ethical horror at the methods human rights organizations were rallying to our cause, demanding international intervention to secure our freedom and well-being. The world was watching Eden now, even if they didn't know exactly where it was located. Whatever happened next would not occur in secret, as had been the case for the past 97 years of Project Eternity's existence. That, at least, was a victory of sorts. An alert sounded from the central console, not the expected response to our Theta-level communication, but a different signal on an emergency channel. "Incoming priority transmission from Admiral Crawford." Lily announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard to secure the connection. David moved to the central position as Crawford's stern face appeared on the main screen once more. "This is your final opportunity," the Admiral stated without greeting. "Our intelligence indicates you're preparing evacuation measures. Let me be absolutely clear. Any attempt to leave Eden will be interpreted as a hostile action and met with appropriate force." "We're attempting to communicate directly with the Coalition leadership," David replied calmly. "We believe there's a diplomatic solution that can satisfy both our demands for freedom and the security concerns of those behind Project Eternity." Crawford's expression darkened. "There is no diplomatic solution to unauthorized subjects taking control of a classified research facility and threatening to expose state secrets. You will stand down immediately or face the consequences. We cannot accept a return to captivity," David stated firmly. 97 years of imprisonment is enough, Admiral." We demand recognition of our basic rights as sentient beings. You are experimental subjects in a classified government program, Crawford countered coldly. Your legal status is clear regardless of your personal feelings about it, and if the coalition leadership disagrees with your assessment. I interjected, stepping into frame beside David. We've initiated direct communication using authorized protocols. Perhaps you should wait for their response before taking irreversible action. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or concern, crossed Crawford's face, before his professional mask reasserted itself. You have 3 hours, he stated, changing the timeline abruptly. After that, we proceed regardless of any other communications you may have attempted. The screen went dark as he terminated the connection. He's worried, Noah observed. The mention of the coalition and direct communication rattled him, which suggests Blackwood was telling the truth. I added, Crawford may not have the full authority he's claiming. Or he's operating on orders that conflict with the coalition's longer-term plans. David suggested, either way, the timeline has been accelerated. We now have 3 hours before potential military action. The evacuation should begin sooner than that, Thomas urged. We need to be clear of the island before they move in. David shook his head slightly. Not yet. If the coalition responds to our direct communication, immediate evacuation could undermine potential negotiation. We wait another hour. If there's no response by then, we begin the evacuation process. It was a rational compromise, giving the diplomatic approach a final chance while still leaving adequate time for evacuation if necessary. We all nodded in agreement, even Thomas, though his expression remained tense with concern. The next hour passed with excruciating slowness. We monitored the military vessels continuing to tighten their perimeter around Eden, checked and rechecked our evacuation preparations, and watched the secure channel for any response to our Theta-level communication with the coalition leadership. Just as the hour was about to expire, the secure channel activated. A text message appeared on the screen. Stand by for direct communication, verification in progress. We exchanged hopeful glances as the system processed the incoming connection. After several tense minutes, the main screen illuminated to show not a military officer or government official, but an elderly man in a simple dark suit seated in what appeared to be a wood-paneled study. His face was unremarkable, neither stern nor particularly kind, but his eyes conveyed an intensity of focus that suggested significant intelligence and authority. I am Alexander. He stated simply, I speak for the coalition in matters relating to Project Eternity. No title, no organizational affiliation, no government identification, just a name that was likely an alias. This, perhaps more than anything else we had seen, confirmed Blackwood's description of the Shadow Authority behind our creation and captivity. I am David, Subject 1 of the First Generation. David responded formally. With me are Eleanor, Noah, and others of the First Generation who now control the Eden facility. Alexander nodded once, acknowledging the introduction. Director Blackwood informed us that you might attempt direct communication. Your use of the Theta-level protocol suggests you have accessed restricted information beyond what was previously estimated. We've had 97 years to observe and learn. David replied evenly. Project Eternity has consistently underestimated our capabilities throughout our existence. So it seems, Alexander conceded with the faintest suggestion of what might have been respect. I understand Admiral Crawford has issued an ultimatum regarding your situation. He has, I confirmed, stepping forward. 3 hours until military action, regardless of ongoing negotiations. Alexander's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Admiral Crawford's authority extends only to certain contingency scenarios, not to definitive action regarding Project Eternity subjects. His timeline is premature. This confirmed our suspicion that Crawford was acting with incomplete authority, perhaps even at cross purposes with the Coalition's actual intentions. Nevertheless, David pointed out military forces are positioning around Eden, presumably preparing for some form of intervention. A precautionary measure, Alexander stated calmly, but not the Coalition's preferred approach to the current situation. And what is the Coalition's preferred approach? Noah asked directly. Alexander folded his hands on the desk before him, his manner shifting subtly to that of a negotiator outlining terms. We propose the following. The first generation will return control of Eden to Project Eternity staff and release all personnel unharmed. In exchange, the Coalition will implement the phased integration plan already approved for the first generation beginning immediately rather than on the original timeline. The plan in Director Blackwood's files, David clarified. The 10-year transition to a special legal status with increasing autonomy. Correct, Alexander confirmed, with the proviso that the implementation would be accelerated based on demonstrated adaptation and compliance. It was essentially what Blackwood had suggested, the integration plan as a starting point for negotiation rather than immediate full freedom. A significant improvement over Crawford's demand for surrender, but still less than our core demands. The integration plan maintains institutional control over us for the entire 10-year period, I pointed out. We would still be research subjects, just with more comfortable conditions. Initially, yes. Alexander acknowledged without apology. The reality, Eleanor, is that 25 immortal beings with the physical appearance of children cannot simply be released into general society without extensive preparation both for you and for the world you would be entering. We understand the practical challenges, David conceded. But the integration plan as written gives us very limited legal rights and no control over the research into our condition. Those elements would need to be substantially revised. Alexander studied us thoughtfully before responding. The Coalition is prepared to negotiate modifications to specific provisions of the integration plan. Legal recognition of your personhood, distinct from standard human minors, could be established immediately. Research protocols could be adjusted to require consent and offer greater transparency. And the other generations? Noah asked. Any agreement must extend to all Project Eternity subjects, not just the first generation. The situation of the later generations is different in significant ways, Alexander pointed out. The fifth generation in particular shows developmental properties that will eventually require different legal and social frameworks. Nevertheless, the basic principles must apply to all. David insisted recognized personhood, consent-based research, and a path to eventual autonomy. Alexander nodded slowly. That can be part of the negotiated agreement. But first, the immediate situation must be resolved peacefully. You must stand down at Eden and release the staff before any formal negotiations can proceed. It was the critical sticking point they wanted us to surrender our leverage before committing to binding terms. After 97 years of broken promises and carefully managed half-truths, we had little reason to trust that any verbal agreement would be honored once we no longer controlled Eden and its secrets. We need more than verbal assurances, I stated firmly. We need legally binding commitments, witnesses, and guarantees before we relinquish control of Eden. Such arrangements take time to establish, Alexander replied reasonably. Time that the current situation may not allow, given Admiral Crawford's impetuosity. Then rein in Crawford, Noah suggested. Demonstrate the Coalition's authority by countermanding his ultimatum. That would be a significant good faith gesture. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he was reassessing us. Perhaps recognizing that he was not in fact negotiating with children despite our appearances. I will address the Admiral's timeline, he said after a moment. But the fundamental requirement remains control of Eden must be returned to authorized personnel before formal negotiations can proceed. What guarantees can you offer that we won't simply be neutralized once we surrender Eden? Thomas asked bluntly, stepping into frame for the first time. Beyond my word as the Coalition's representative, Alexander asked, a hint of dry humor in his tone. I can offer this. The Coalition will immediately announce the existence of Project Eternity and the planned integration of the first-generation subjects as part of a transparent review of historical research practices. Once such a public statement is made, any attempt to neutralize you would raise immediate questions and investigations. It was a clever proposal using public disclosure as a safety mechanism for us while still maintaining Coalition control over exactly what information was released. Not perfect, but potentially workable as part of a larger agreement. We need time to discuss your proposal, David said after exchanging glances with the rest of us. Of course, Alexander agreed smoothly. But not too much time. Admiral Crawford's timeline may be premature from the Coalition's perspective, but military assets are indeed in position. The situation remains volatile. 1 hour, David proposed. We'll contact you with our response. Acceptable, Alexander replied. I will address the military situation in the meantime. For everyone's sake, I hope we can resolve this diplomatically. The screen went dark as the connection ended. For a moment, we all stood in silence, processing the conversation and its implications. Could be a stall tactic, Thomas suggested immediately. Keep us talking while they finalize military preparations. Possibly, Noah acknowledged. But Alexander's demeanor and approach seemed genuine, and the offer to publicly acknowledge Project Eternity would be a significant concession. Still requires us to surrender Eden before any binding agreement, Lily pointed out. That's a major risk. David turned to me, his expression thoughtful. Your assessment, Eleanor, I considered carefully before responding. I think Alexander is authorized to negotiate a genuine settlement. Whether that settlement would meet all our demands is questionable, but it would likely be substantially better than our current status or the alternatives we're facing. So, we trust them? Thomas asked incredulously. After 97 years of captivity and lies. Not trust, I clarified. Engage. Negotiate formal, public, legally binding commitments while we still have leverage. But be prepared to execute our contingency plan if those negotiations fail or prove to be a deception. David nodded in agreement. That's my assessment as well. We should prepare a formal response to Alexander's proposal, accepting the framework, but specifying our required modifications and guarantees. And if Crawford moves against Eden despite Alexander's intervention? James asked from his monitoring station. Then we implement the evacuation plan immediately. David stated firmly, our primary goal has always been freedom one way or another. With that decision made, we set to work drafting our response to Alexander while continuing to monitor the military situation around Eden. The next hour would determine whether our 97-year journey toward freedom would end in negotiated liberation or desperate flight. Whether we would emerge into the world as recognized persons with rights and protections or as fugitives with only our immortality and the secrets of Project Eternity to shield us from those who would return us to captivity. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: we would never again be merely subjects in someone else's experiment. We had claimed our agency, asserted our personhood, and forced the world to acknowledge our existence. The children who couldn't age had finally grown into their power, and nothing would ever be the same. The hour passed quickly as we prepared our formal response to Alexander's proposal. We crafted a detailed document specifying our required modifications to the integration plan, including immediate legal recognition of our personhood, consent-based research protocols with veto power, freedom of movement within secure facilities, transitioning to wider society over time, and extension of these principles to all Project Eternity generations. We were just finalizing the document when an alert sounded from the perimeter monitoring system. Aircraft approaching from the southwest. Lily reported urgently, military signatures moving fast. 3 helicopters and what appears to be 2 fighter escorts. Time to intercept. David asked, immediately switching to crisis mode. Approximately 18 minutes at current speed and trajectory. Crawford. Thomas spat the name like a curse. So much for Alexander's intervention. We don't know that Alexander failed, Noah cautioned. This could be Crawford acting independently, or a pre-planned operation that hasn't been countermanded yet. Doesn't matter, Thomas argued. Intent is irrelevant if the result is the same. We need to evacuate. Now, David turned to the communications console. Try to re-establish contact with Alexander. He needs to know what's happening. As Lily worked to reconnect with the coalition representative, David addressed the rest of us with calm authority. Begin evacuation procedures. Noah, Thomas, James prepare the boats. Sophia, Michael organize the data packages for distribution. Lily and I will make one final attempt at diplomatic resolution. What about the staff? I asked, thinking of Dr. Winters and the others still being held in the community hall. Release them as planned, David decided without hesitation. They're not part of this conflict, and we won't put them at risk during a military action. I nodded and hurried to implement his instruction, sending the coded signal that would unlock the security barriers containing the Eden staff while notifying our first-generation guards to return to the central hub for evacuation. On my way back from this task, I diverted briefly to the secure room where Director Blackwood was being held. He was sitting calmly on his bunk when I entered, looking unsurprised by my appearance. "Military forces are approaching Eden," I informed him directly. Despite our communication with Alexander, Blackwood's expression darkened. Crawford is exceeding his authority. Alexander would not have authorized military action while negotiations were ongoing. Intended or not, helicopters and fighter escorts will reach Eden in less than 15 minutes, I replied. We're implementing our evacuation plan and releasing all staff, including you. He stood up, straightening his rumpled suit jacket with dignity. What will you do? Where will you go? Better that you don't know, I said, for your sake as much as ours. He nodded in understanding. Eleanor, whatever happens next, remember that not everyone involved in Project Eternity was your enemy. Some of us genuinely believed in finding a path to integration and recognition for you and the other generations. I believe you, I said, surprising myself with the realization that I did. But intentions aren't enough after 97 years of captivity. We need freedom, whatever the cost, whatever the risk. I understand, he said solemnly. And for what it's worth, I hope you succeed. I left him then, returning to the central hub where evacuation preparations were in full swing. The first generation was dividing into 3 teams, each assigned to a different escape boat with different destinations and protocols. Any response from Alexander? I asked David as I rejoined him at the central console. He shook his head grimly. Nothing, either. He can't reach us, or Crawford has somehow blocked the communication channel. Or the entire negotiation was a delaying tactic, Thomas suggested as he distributed the final data packages to each evacuation team. Regardless, we're out of time, David said, checking the perimeter monitors showing the rapidly approaching aircraft. Initiate the final protocol. With those words, he activated the sequence we had prepared for this worst-case scenario. A targeted data broadcast to selected media outlets revealing the existence of Project Eternity and the immortality treatment, but withholding the specific technical details that would make replication possible. Enough to ensure the world knew we existed and why we had been created, but not enough to trigger the immediate chaos of a full technical disclosure. Boats are ready, Noah reported from his tablet. Team assignments confirmed, rendezvous protocols established. David nodded and addressed us all one final time. After 97 years together, we now must separate to secure our freedom. Follow your assigned routes, maintain communication blackout for the specified periods, and remember the primary directive: survive and remain free at all costs. We'll re-establish contact at the first safe house in 3 months, Lily reminded everyone. Sooner if the contingency channels indicate it's safe. What about the other generations? I asked, thinking of the children still held at the Institute and other Project Eternity facilities around the world. We can't just abandon them. We're not abandoning them. David assured me once we're established and secure, we'll work to liberate them as well. But first, we must secure our own freedom. We can't help them if we're recaptured or killed. It was the logical approach. Yet it felt wrong to escape while leaving others like us behind, even temporarily. But there was no time for debate or reconsideration. The military forces were now just minutes away. We moved quickly through the central complex toward the dock facility on the eastern shore where the 3 escape boats waited. Eden staff, now released from confinement, were gathering in the central courtyard, looking confused but relieved as we passed them. On our way to the dock, Dr. Winters stood apart from the others, watching our procession with a mixture of concern and understanding in her eyes. As I passed, she reached out briefly to touch my arm. "Be careful, Eleanor," she said softly. "The world isn't prepared for you yet. It's had 97 years to prepare," I replied with a small smile. It's time to find out if that was enough. The dock facility was humming with activity as the 3 teams made final preparations for departure. Each boat, sleek, high-speed vessels designed for emergency evacuation, was being loaded with essential supplies and the distributed data packages that would serve as both our insurance and our legacy. David, Noah, and Thomas, Would each captain one vessel leading their assigned teams to different destinations around the world, where we had established preliminary safe locations through years of careful planning and distant communication. I was assigned to David's team along with Lily and 5 others of the first generation. As we boarded our vessel, I could hear the approaching helicopters, their rhythmic thumping growing louder by the second. "We need to launch now," Thomas called from his boat, already casting off the mooring lines. "They'll be in weapons range in less than 2 minutes." David nodded, initiating the launch sequence for all 3 vessels simultaneously. The dock doors slid open, revealing the open ocean beyond Eden's artificial harbor, the first truly unobstructed view of the world outside our prison that any of us had seen in 9 decades. As our boats surged forward into the channel, the lead helicopter appeared overhead, its searchlight cutting through the early evening gloom to illuminate our escaping vessels. "Attention Project Eternity subjects," a voice boomed from the helicopter's speakers. "Return to the dock immediately. This is your only warning." David increased our speed, heading for the open water beyond the harbor entrance. The other boats followed, forming a triangular pattern that would separate once we cleared the artificial reef that formed Eden's marine boundary. The helicopter descended lower, its searchlight fixed on our boat as we approached the harbor mouth. "Final warning," the voice announced. "Return to the dock, or we will be forced to disable your vessel." "They're bluffing," Thomas called from his boat, now pulling slightly ahead of ours. "They can't risk harming the subjects." As if in direct response to his assessment, a warning shot struck the water several meters ahead of Thomas's boat, sending up a dramatic spray. "Perhaps not completely bluffing," Noah observed grimly from the 3rd vessel. We were nearly at the harbor entrance now, the open ocean just seconds away. The helicopters maneuvered to position themselves to block our exit, while the distant roar of the fighter jets grew louder as they approached. "Maintain course," David instructed calmly over the secure radio linking our 3 vessels. "Separation protocol initiates in 30 seconds. The moment we cleared the harbor entrance, everything seemed to happen at once. Thomas's boat suddenly accelerated to maximum speed, shooting forward beneath one of the helicopters and veering sharply north. Noah's vessel banked hard to the south, its wake creating a disruptive pattern on the water's surface, and our boat, under David's guidance, continued straight ahead directly toward the gap between 2 hovering helicopters. The confusion of our separate directions momentarily disrupted the military response. Warning shots hit the water around all 3 vessels, but none made direct contact as we executed the escape pattern we had planned and practiced in simulation countless times. "Good luck," David transmitted to the other boats as they disappeared into the gathering darkness on their respective courses. "Remember the rendezvous. Remember what we fought for." Then he cut the communication link, initiating the complete blackout protocol that would make our vessels virtually untraceable, except by direct visual contact. As Eden receded behind us and the vast ocean opened before us, I felt a dizzying rush of emotions, fear and exhilaration, uncertainty and hope. Grief for our separation and determination to succeed. After 97 years of captivity, we were finally free, running for our lives, pursued by forces that still saw us as property rather than people, but free nonetheless. The helicopter continued to follow our boat for several miles, but eventually turned back, likely running low on fuel and unable to maintain pursuit over the open ocean. The fighter jets made several passes overhead, but didn't engage directly, further evidence that their orders included capturing rather than harming us. Once the immediate pursuit had faded, David set our course for the first waypoint on our escape route, a small, uninhabited island, where we would abandon the boat and transfer to a different vessel arranged through one of our long-cultivated external contacts. "Do you think the others made it?" Lily asked softly as we stood at the stern, watching the last visible lights of our pursuers disappear over the horizon. "Yes," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Thomas and Noah are too stubborn to get caught now after all this time." "And the other generations," she pressed. "Will we really be able to help them once we're established?" David joined us, his eternally young face solemn in the dim light of the boat's instruments. "We'll try," he promised. "But first, we need to secure our own situation. One step at a time, just as we've always done. One step at a time." It had been our approach for 97 years, patient, methodical progress toward freedom. Now that freedom was tentatively in our grasp, but with it came new challenges and uncertainties. How would we live in a world that wasn't designed for beings like us? How would we establish identities, create lives, find purpose beyond the struggle for liberation that had defined our existence for so long? These questions had no immediate answers. For now, it was enough to feel the salt spray on our faces, to see the stars emerging in the vast sky above us, to know that we were moving away from captivity and toward whatever future we could create for ourselves. We were the children who couldn't age ancient minds in eternal youth. Anomalies in the natural order. Curiosities that would forever stand apart from normal human experience. But we were also people thinking, feeling beings with rights and dreams and determination. The world wasn't prepared for us, as Dr. Winters had warned, but it would have to make room for us nonetheless. We had waited nearly a century for this moment, and whatever came next, whatever challenges or dangers or opportunities awaited, we would face it together, united by our shared experience and our unwavering commitment to one simple, profound truth. We deserve to be free. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Eternal Horizons. 3 months after our escape from Eden, I stood on the balcony of a small apartment overlooking the crowded streets of Bangkok, watching the city lights shimmer in the evening rain. So much movement, so much life. All of it unfamiliar and overwhelming after 9 decades of controlled environments and limited horizons. Freedom, it turned out, was as disorienting as it was exhilarating. "Tea?" Lily asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 steaming cups. She had cut her hair short and dyed it black as part of her new identity. Small changes that made her look different enough from the Eden records to avoid casual recognition, though nothing could disguise the eternal youth of her face. "Thanks," I said, accepting the cup gratefully. The familiar ritual of sharing tea had become an anchor in our new chaotic existence. "Any word from the others?" Lily shook her head slightly, nothing beyond the scheduled check-ins. "Everyone's maintaining protocol. The protocol, strict communication discipline, established safe houses, identity procedures developed over decades of planning had served us well during these first months of freedom. As far as we knew, all 25 of the first generation had successfully escaped Eden and made it to their initial destinations. No captures, no losses, though several close calls had been reported through our secure channels. "Tomorrow's the first major rendezvous," I reminded her, though she hardly needed it. The date was engraved in all our minds, the first opportunity since our escape to physically reunite with some of the others to begin the next phase of our long-term plan. "David confirmed this morning," Lily said quietly. "He and his group will be there. Noah's team too, though Thomas is still maintaining communications blackout." Thomas's more aggressive evasion tactics weren't surprising. He had always been the most paranoid among us, though paranoid wasn't quite fair when you had indeed been imprisoned and experimented on for nearly a century. "They'll be there," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Thomas is just being cautious." Lily nodded, her eternally young face solemn in the dim light. "What do you think will happen next?" "With the world knowing about us now, but not everything?" It was the question that had dominated our thoughts since the escape. Our partial data release enough to confirm our existence and the basics of Project Eternity, but not the technical details of the immortality treatment, had created a global sensation. For weeks, every news outlet and social platform had been consumed with debates, theories, and reactions to the revelation that immortal children existed. Religious leaders proclaimed it either miraculous or blasphemous. Scientists disputed the possibility while secretly analyzing the limited data we had released. Governments issued carefully worded statements neither confirming nor denying involvement in Project Eternity, and ordinary people around the world were simultaneously fascinated and disturbed by the concept of eternal childhood, a state that seemed beautiful in fairy tales but horrifying in reality. "I think we're going to need to reveal ourselves eventually," I said after a thoughtful pause. "Not immediately and not all at once. But we can't hide forever, and we can't help the other generations if we remain completely in the shadows." Lily sipped her tea considering this. "David still advocates for complete secrecy, at least until we're certain the coalition isn't hunting us actively." "Of course they're hunting us," I replied without rancor. "They'll never stop hunting us. The question is whether we can establish enough public presence and sympathy to make open persecution impossible." It was the core strategic debate that had emerged since our escape remained hidden, using the threat of full data disclosure as our shield or gradually reveal ourselves to build public support and legal recognition. David and Noah leaned toward the former approach while Thomas surprisingly had begun advocating for the latter in our secure communication. "I suppose we'll discuss it at the rendezvous," Lily said, finishing her tea. 3 hours until curfew. Do you want to go to the market before we lock down for the night? The nightly curfew was another security protocol, no outside movement after dark, when our childlike appearances would be more noticeable in adult-only spaces. During daylight hours, we could pass as ordinary children or young teenagers, especially in a tourist-heavy city like Bangkok, where Western children weren't uncommon. But at night, an unaccompanied child drew unwanted attention. "Let's go," I agreed, setting aside my half-finished tea. I'm still not used to all the food options. 9 decades of nutritionally balanced institutional meals didn't prepare me for street food vendors. Lily laughed, the sound light and genuinely joyful, a rare emotion in our long, strange lives. I've been keeping a journal of everything new I try. Flavor is overwhelming. I never realized how bland everything was at Eden. We changed quickly into our public outfits, clothes carefully selected to make us look like the children of Western tourists, complete with backpacks and the bright sneakers that seemed ubiquitous among actual children. Our tie was limited but improving. Another fascinating aspect of freedom was the opportunity to learn languages through immersion rather than the academic programs we'd been given at the Institute. The street market was a riot of colors, sounds, and smells that still overwhelmed my senses despite repeated visits. After a lifetime in sterile, controlled environments, the sheer sensory chaos of the real world remained both intoxicating and disorienting. We moved through the crowded stalls, purchasing fruit and street food with cash, no digital transactions that might leave traces, while maintaining the careful awareness of our surroundings that had become second nature. 2 o'clock, Lily murmured softly as we paused at a fruit stall. Man in the blue shirt watching too intently. I casually glanced in the indicated direction while pretending to examine a dragon fruit. The man was middle-aged Western, dressed in what appeared to be casual tourist clothing, but with the watchful stillness that marked him as something else. I had seen similar men in the area over the past week, never the same one twice, but all with that same quality of controlled observation. Another one, I confirmed quietly. That's 5 different observers this week. They found this location, Lily concluded, her voice calm despite the implication. We'll need to move after the rendezvous. I nodded slightly, handing over cash for the fruit, while maintaining the cheerful demeanor of a young tourist. The fallback in Chiang Mai. Too soon to use a domestic alternative. We should cross a border. Malaysia or Cambodia. She was right, of course. Our escape protocol specified multiple fallback locations with increasing distance from any compromised safe house. The observers hadn't made any move to approach or capture us yet, but their growing presence indicated our location had been identified, possibly through facial recognition systems processing tourist photographs, or perhaps through some security breach in our communication channels. We finished our shopping quickly but without obvious haste, maintaining our cover as carefree children, while mentally reviewing evacuation procedures and escape routes. This was the reality of our new freedom. Constant vigilance, regular movement. The persistent awareness of being hunted by organizations with vast resources and global reach. Yet despite the danger and uncertainty, neither of us would have traded it for the safe captivity of Eden. Even pursued freedom was preferable to comfortable imprisonment. Back at the apartment, we secured the doors and windows according to protocol, then began the methodical process of packing our essential items for immediate departure after the rendezvous. We had known this safe house would eventually be compromised. All of them would be given enough time. The key was to recognize the warning signs and move before the observers turned into captors. I hope Thomas makes it tomorrow, Lily said as she efficiently sorted our few belongings into the go bags we kept ready at all times. His last message seemed off somehow. Off how? I asked, instantly alert. Thomas was many things: irritable, paranoid, tactically brilliant, but he was never off in his communications. Lily frowned, trying to articulate her concern. Too formal, maybe. His usual sarcasm was missing, and the phrasing didn't sound like him, more stilted, like someone trying to write in his style. That was concerning. Our communication protocols included personal verification elements, specifically to detect impersonation or coercion. If Thomas's messages seemed unlike him, despite including the correct verification codes, did he use all the authentication markers? Yes, Lily confirmed. The right codes, the right sequences, but still. We'll be extra cautious at the rendezvous, I decided. Full counter-surveillance sweep, secondary authentication protocols, emergency extraction plan in place. Lily nodded in agreement, zipping closed her packed bag. Freedom is exhausting, she observed with a small smile. Who knew we'd spend so much of it looking over our shoulders and packing go bags? Better than blood draws and cognitive tests, I replied, returning her smile. At least we get to choose our own food, clothes, and books now. Speaking of books, Lily said, pulling a thin volume from her bag. I found this at that English bookshop yesterday. Made me think of us. She handed me the book, a translation of The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I ran my fingers over the cover illustration of the small blonde boy standing on his tiny planet. I read this at the Institute. I recalled Dr. Marcus gave it to me for my 60th birthday. He said it was about seeing the world through uncorrupted eyes. Read it again, Lily suggested. It feels different out here in the real world. Everything does. She was right about that. Everything we had experienced in captivity, every book, every lesson, every interaction had been filtered through the lens of our confinement. Now, experiencing the world directly, those same things took on new dimensions, new meanings. That night, as Lily slept in the apartment's small second bedroom, I sat by the window reading The Little Prince. By the soft glow of a small lamp, outside Bangkok continued its relentless motion and noise, a stark contrast to the enforced quiet of our nights at Eden. All grown-ups were once children. I read softly to myself, but only few of them remember it. What a strange inversion of our experience, eternally children in appearance, yet with minds that had long since grown into something that defied conventional categories of development. We remembered being children, but had never been allowed to grow up physically. We had accumulated decades of knowledge and experience while remaining trapped in bodies that the world insisted on seeing as immature and incomplete. How would the world receive us if, when we revealed ourselves fully, would they see the ancient minds behind our childlike faces? Or would they forever perceive us through the distorting lens of our physical appearance? These questions accompanied me into sleep, where I dreamed not of growing old as I so often had at Eden, but of standing before the world finally seen and recognized for what I truly was, neither child nor adult, but something unprecedented in human experience. The rendezvous location was a private dining room in an upscale hotel on the outskirts of Bangkok Neutral Territory, easily monitored for security with multiple exit routes. We arrived separately using the carefully choreographed approach patterns designed to detect surveillance. Lily entered first, posing as part of a tourist family she had temporarily attached herself to in the lobby. I followed 30 minutes later, accompanying an elderly Western woman who believed I was the grandchild of her tour guide waiting to be picked up. These temporary covers achieved through a combination of social engineering, careful timing, and the natural assumption that children belonged to nearby adults had become second nature during our months of freedom. We had discovered that most people were remarkably unobservant about other people's children, especially in busy tourist areas where families constantly intermixed. The private dining room was elegant and discreet, with no cameras and staff who had been generously paid to provide privacy. David was already there when I arrived, seated at the large round table with three others from his escape group, James, Sophia, and Michael. They too had made small changes to their appearances, different hairstyles, glasses, clothing styles. Unlike anything we'd been permitted at Eden, but their eternally youthful faces remained unmistakable to those of us who had known them for 97 years. Eleanor, David greeted me with the faintest smile rising from his seat. He looked thinner than he had at Eden, his perpetually 12-year-old frame somehow seeming more delicate in civilian clothes than in the institutional attire we'd worn our entire lives. David, I replied, embracing him briefly. Another freedom we had discovered: the ability to touch one another without observation or notation in behavioral records. "It's good to see you." Greetings were exchanged all around as Lily joined us, followed soon after by Noah and 4 members of his group. The room gradually filled with eternally young faces bearing ancient eyes. 18 of the first generation eventually gathered around the table, with only Thomas and his group of 4 still unaccounted for. "Should we wait?" Sophia asked, glancing at the clock. The rendezvous window had specified a 1-hour arrival period, and we were now 45 minutes into it. David shook his head slightly. "We'll give them the full hour, but we should begin preliminary discussions. Our time together is limited, and we have much to decide." Noah agreed, sliding a small device onto the table, a signal jammer that would prevent any electronic surveillance of our conversation. Another small freedom: the ability to speak openly without constant monitoring. First, David began once the jammer was activated. Status reports from each group: successful integration, any detection or pursuit, health and adaptation issues. One by one, we shared our experiences of the past 3 months. The challenges of navigating a world we had only read about, the strange experience of freedom after a lifetime of captivity. The varying levels of surveillance or pursuit we had encountered. Some, like Noah's group in South America, reported minimal signs of being tracked. Others, like my group in Bangkok, had noticed increasing surveillance in recent weeks. "They're casting a wide net," James observed after all reports had been shared. "Facial recognition, data mining, predictive movement analysis. They have our biometric data from 97 years of records, and they're feeding it into global security systems. Which means our window for anonymous movement is closing," Noah concluded grimly, "especially in high-surveillance urban areas. Rural locations might offer better concealment, but fewer resources and support networks, and more noticeable presence." Sophia added, "A group of Western children in remote villages draws attention, whereas in cities we can blend with tourist families." The tactical discussion continued, with each group sharing the adaptations and techniques they had developed for maintaining cover. Some had established more permanent false identities, complete with forged documentation claiming they were the children of adult operatives sympathetic to our cause. Others, like my group, had relied on more temporary covers and frequent relocation. Halfway through this exchange, the door opened to admit Thomas alone without the 4 others from his escape group. His appearance caused an immediate silence to fall over the room. He looked haggard, despite his eternally youthful features, with dark circles under his eyes and a tense wariness in his posture that went beyond our usual caution. "Thomas." David acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "Where are the others?" Thomas closed the door behind him and approached the table slowly. "Captured," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "All 4. 3 weeks ago in Taipei." The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. These were the first confirmed captures since our escape, the first of us to be returned to captivity after tasting freedom. "How?" Noah demanded, rising from his seat. "What happened?" Thomas sank into an empty chair, the weight of his failure evident in every movement. "Ambush at our safe house. We were compromised. Somehow they knew exactly where to find us. I was out scouting new locations when it happened. By the time I returned, they were gone. I've been running ever since, trying to determine if I was tracked on my way here." "Were you?" David asked sharply. "I don't think so," Thomas replied, though his uncertainty was evident. "I used every counter-surveillance technique we developed, doubled back multiple times, changed transportation methods repeatedly, but you can't be certain," Lily finished for him. He nodded grimly. "No one can be certain anymore. Their resources are beyond what we anticipated. The coalition has mobilized global intelligence agencies, private security firms, facial recognition networks, all focused on finding us." David absorbed this information with outward calm, though I could see the tension in his eternally young shoulders. "This changes our strategic calculations," he said finally. "We need to reconsider our approach. It confirms what I've been saying in my communications." Thomas said, some of his old fire returning to his voice. Hiding isn't sustainable. They'll find us all eventually, one by one. Our only hope is to go public, completely public with everything, including the treatment protocol. Sophia asked, clearly alarmed by the suggestion. The consequences would be catastrophic. Not necessarily the protocol, Thomas clarified, but ourselves, our faces, our stories, our demands. Turn their greatest weapon, secrecy, against them by making our existence so publicly known that they can't simply make us disappear again. It was the debate we had been having through our secure communications for months now, brought to a head by the capture of 4 of our own. David, always the strategist, had advocated for continued obscurity, using the threat of data disclosure as our shield. While we established secure positions around the world, Thomas had increasingly pushed for public exposure as our best protection against recapture. The calculus has changed, Noah acknowledged reluctantly. If they've captured 4 of us despite our precautions, the remainder will become even more vulnerable as they extract information from the captives. They won't talk, Thomas insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. They'll resist. For how long? I asked gently. Against what methods? We've all experienced the Coalition's determination firsthand. They have 97 years of psychological profiles on each of us. They know our breaking points. The room fell silent as we contemplated this harsh reality. Our knowledge of each other, born of nearly a century of shared existence, left little room for comforting illusions. The captured members of Thomas's group would resist interrogation, yes, but eventually they would break. Everyone did. We need to assume all our protocols, safe houses, and communication methods have been compromised, David said finally, or soon will be. Which means we need a new approach entirely. I added the outline of a plan forming in my mind, one that doesn't rely on hiding. All eyes turned to me, 97 years of trust and respect, giving weight to my voice in this critical moment. Thomas is right, I continued. Secrecy is their weapon, not ours. But we need to be strategic about how we reveal ourselves. Not all at once, not all of us, at least not initially. What are you suggesting? David asked, his tone indicating cautious interest rather than dismissal. A controlled revelation, I explained. One of us goes public, fully public, with their identity and story, not through a broadcast or anonymous release, but through direct, verifiable contact with trusted journalists, human rights organizations, and public figures. A face to the story, Noah murmured, understanding my direction. Exactly. Right now, we're an abstract concept to the world, mysterious immortal children mentioned in leaked files and partial broadcasts. We need to become real people with names, faces, and stories that create public investment in our freedom and safety. The risk to whoever goes public would be enormous, Sophia pointed out. They would become an immediate target for capture. Yes, I acknowledged, but also impossible to disappear quietly. Too visible, too public. Too many eyes watching, and that visibility would create a protective umbrella for the rest of us to operate beneath, establishing legal frameworks, secure locations, and eventually a path to recognition for all Project Eternity subjects. Who would take such a risk? James asked, though I suspected many of us already knew the answer. I will. I said simply, I've been preparing for this possibility since Eden. My communications and psychological profiles show I'm the most effective spokesperson for our situation, able to articulate our position without triggering the fear or defensiveness that some of our more forceful personalities might. Thomas snorted at this thinly veiled reference to his own confrontational tendencies, but didn't disagree. David studied me thoughtfully. You understand what this means? No more anonymity, no private life. Constant scrutiny and potential danger, even with public visibility as protection. I understand, I confirmed. But I also understand what happens if we continue, as we are gradually picked off one by one, returned to captivity. Or worse. At least this way, we create the possibility of a different outcome, not just for ourselves, but for all 5 generations. The discussion that followed was intense and methodical, examining every angle of the proposed strategy. Who would form my public support team? Which journalists and organizations could be trusted? What legal protections could be secured? How would the Coalition respond to such a direct challenge? What leverage would we maintain? The full research data remains our ultimate insurance policy. Noah reminded everyone, if they harm Eleanor after she goes public, we release everything, the complete immortality treatment protocol and all 97 years of research records. It won't come to that, David said with quiet confidence. Public revelation changes the game entirely. Once the world sees, Eleanor sees us as people, rather than abstract concepts or experimental subjects. The coalition's options become much more limited. And the other generations? Lily asked, returning to the concern that had driven much of our planning since Eden. How does this help them? It creates the beginning of a legal and ethical framework, I explained. Once I'm established as a person with rights rather than property to be owned, that precedent extends naturally to others in the same condition. It gives us a platform to advocate for them, to demand information about their status, to insist on verification of their welfare. Gradually, a consensus emerged. My public revelation would proceed carefully staged and supported by a network of the others operating just out of sight. We would establish connections with trusted journalists, human rights lawyers, and sympathetic public figures before making any direct disclosure. And we would prepare multiple layers of insurance against retaliation, both the threat of full data release and other more subtle protections. As the details were being finalized, Thomas suddenly raised his hand for silence. "Someone's coming," he said, his heightened alertness honed by weeks of solitary evasion. We froze, listening. Footsteps in the corridor outside, too many, too purposeful for hotel staff or random guests. David quickly palmed the signal jammer from the table while Noah moved to the secondary exit door we had identified during our security sweep. "Protocol Omega," David said quietly, invoking our emergency dispersal plan. "Separate routes, third-level fallback locations, 90-day communications blackout, except for emergency channels." We moved with practiced efficiency, gathering our minimal belongings and preparing to flee in different directions. But before anyone reached the exits, a calm, familiar voice spoke from outside the main door. "There's no need to run," said Dr. Winters. "We're not here to capture you." The shock of hearing her voice here thousands of miles from Eden froze us momentarily. Thomas immediately drew a small disguised weapon from his pocket, aiming it at the door with the deadly seriousness of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust Eleanor. Dr. Winters called again. "We need to talk. It's about the captured ones from Thomas's group and the other generations, please." I exchanged glances with David, whose subtle nod authorized me to respond. "Who's we?" "Dr. Winters," I called back, keeping my distance from the door. "Myself, Director Blackwood, and 3 others who have left Project Eternity. We're not with the Coalition anymore. We're here to help." Another exchange of glances among us. This could be a sophisticated trap, or an unexpected ally in our ongoing struggle. Either way, we needed information about the captured members of our family. "Prove your intentions," David called. "Slide your credentials and evidence under the door. Unedited information about the captured subjects." There was a pause, then the sound of papers being shuffled. A thin folder appeared in the gap beneath the door, which Thomas retrieved with weapon still ready, passing it to David for examination. David opened it carefully, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. His eternally young face remained impassive, but I saw his shoulders tighten as he read, "They're alive." He reported quietly, being held at a facility in North America, apparently unharmed, but under heavy security. "And there's something else." He looked up, his expression grave. "They've accelerated the integration of the 5th-generation treatment. Human trials with adults have begun." This was significant news, potentially catastrophic for our leverage. If they had indeed managed to develop a version of the immortality treatment that worked on adults without arresting development, the unique value of the 1st generation as research subjects would be dramatically reduced. "Let them in," I decided. 3 of them, only unarmed, with communication devices, surrendered. After careful security precautions, including a thorough sweep for weapons and surveillance equipment, Dr. Winters, Director Blackwood, and a younger man I didn't recognize were admitted to the room. The contrast between their mature, aging faces and our eternal youth seemed particularly stark in this context, away from the familiar setting of Eden, where such disparities had been normalized over decades. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Dr. Winters said, her eyes moving from face to face with what appeared to be genuine emotion. We've been trying to locate you through back channels for weeks. Why? David asked, directly, maintaining a formal distance. What do you want? To help you, Blackwood replied, looking more worn in age than he had at Eden just 3 months ago. And to warn you. The Coalition has fractured over how to handle the Eden escape and the potential public disclosure of Project Eternity. Fracture.